Yes. See you there.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else. I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
Hello and welcome, I'm Alastair Stewart, and for the next 3 hours I'll be keeping you company with the stories that really matter all across the country. Plenty coming up as the row over sleaze in politics rolls on. I'll be asking, what can we do to rebuild trust? Purify or purge? Already on Twitter somebody said Plato. We'll talk about that. Plus, we'll be crossing live to the climate protests across the country. And the great Stanley Johnson will be joining me here live in the studio to talk about this brilliant book and, shall we say one or two other things? But first, it's the news with Amelia Harper.
I'm Amelia Harper. This is your news at 12 o'clock. Thousands of people are gathering in Glasgow ahead of a march calling for more action on climate change. Up to 50,000 people are expected to attend the demonstration in the city's West End, where the UN Climate Summit is taking place. It's part of the COP26 coalition's Global Day of Action for Climate Justice. Demonstrations will also take place across the UK, including Newcastle, Cardiff, Manchester and London. People will be able to book their COVID-19 booster jabs 5 months after their second dose from Monday. Currently, boosters can only be booked after 6, but the booking system is changing next week to speed up the rollout ahead of winter. People will still only be able to receive the vaccine 6 months after their second dose. 12 people have been arrested after hundreds of anti-establishment protesters clashed with police in London on Bonfire Night. 8 police officers have been injured after fireworks were thrown at them in Parliament Square. Demonstrators were taking part in the Million Mask March, protesting against coronavirus restrictions. An effigy of Prime Minister Boris Johnson was also burned in Trafalgar Square. Now, there are some flashing images in this next story. At least 8 people have died in a crowd surge at a festival in Houston in Texas. Several others were also injured at Astroworld Festival on Friday evening, while rapper Travis Scott was performing on stage. 17 people were taken to hospital, including 11 who were in cardiac arrest. Elsewhere, at least 92 people have been killed after an oil tanker exploded near Sierra Leone's capital. It happened when large crowds gathered to collect fuel leaking after a road traffic accident. A giant fireball could be seen burning in the night sky. President Julius Maada Bio, who's in Scotland attending COP26, called it a horrendous loss of life. Sir John Major has criticised the government's approach to the row about Owen Paterson, calling it shameful. The former Conservative Prime Minister said the government's action was damaging and that sleaze is unacceptable. The Prime Minister was forced to do a U-turn on the planned 30-day suspension of Mr Paterson over a serious breach of lobbying rules. A second unnamed player of Asian heritage has come forward alleging racial abuse at Yorkshire County Cricket Club. It comes amid criticism of the club's response to racism experienced by Azim Rafiq. Yesterday, Yorkshire chairman Roger Hutton was one of several board members to resign. Speaking on GB News, former England bowler Monty Panesar said an extensive investigation was needed.
These are obviously, quite shocking and really deep claims because, Rafiq did say that continually the people at Yorkshire were using the P word and they've kind of referred it to as banter. And they're such close friends that, this is such a complex and complicated, situation that, I think thorough investigation and a fair, investigation for all the parties involved, needs to be done.
A woman has been arrested after a paddleboarding incident on a river in Wales in which 4 people died. The arrest comes after police confirmed the death of the 4th person, 41-year-old Andrea Powell from Bridgend, who had been in hospital. The suspect, who police say comes from South Wales, has been arrested on suspicion of gross negligence manslaughter. They've since been released under investigation. GBNews can reveal 1,665 children may have been at risk of being sexually exploited in Rotherham since 2017. According to council risk assessment forms, the number of children identified at the highest risk increased by over 35% between 2017 and 2020. Elizabeth is a survivor of child sexual exploitation identified in the 2014 J report on grooming in Rotherham.
To be honest, and I don't want to be negative, but we look from the J period and now we look at from 2014 when the J report came out to now, and Rotherham's a death trap. And there's nobody that is safe. As children are not safe. And we don't see anyone wanting to make them safe either.
Rotherham Council says that not every allegation will be validated and they urge people to report any suspicions to them. Millions of lower-income families on universal credit will remain worse off by over £1,000 a year with the new budget. According to analysis by think tank Resolution Foundation, around 3.6 million families will see their incomes fall. It follows the earlier ending of the £20 per week universal credit uplift. And 2 hyenas have tested positive for coronavirus in the first cases confirmed among animals worldwide. Samples were taken from Denver Zoo in the United States after several lions and 2 tigers tested positive. The zoo said hyenas have an occasional cough, but they're expected to make a full recovery. You're right up to date. I'll bring you the latest headlines in half an hour. Now it's back to Alastair Stewart and friends.
Amelia, thank you very much indeed. Coming up this afternoon on Alastair Stewart and Friends, it's been a bad week in Westminster with more than a whiff of sleaze in the air. There is no doubt that something is wrong and something needs doing, but we can't just tar all MPs with the same brush. So today I'm asking, what can we do to rebuild trust in politics? Plus, Stanley Johnson will be here to talk about his new novel, From an Antique Land, geopolitics, climate change, and, of course, his son. And ABBA is back with a vengeance. The Swedish superstar's first album in 40 years has shot to the top of the music charts around the globe. And there's even talk that they might help the UK achieve Eurovision glory after rubbing our noses in it with Waterloo by writing our next song entry. I'll be speaking to music industry legend and good friend of the show and mine, Nick Stewart, about all of that. But first, if it was the plot for a political thriller, it would probably be rejected. An ebullient Prime Minister facing an ineffective opposition seems a Teflon sort of guy. Bruised but barely wounded by charges of previous infidelity, alleged serial falsehoods, misjudgments over the handling of the pandemic, he still struts the world stage, seemingly impervious. Yet, relatively minor matters threaten from the wings. Who paid for expensive holidays? And who paid for expensive redecorations of his Downing Street flat? Did he break the rules? Then, a close friend accused and convicted of improper lobbying and facing suspension from the Commons by the Commons authorities turns and seeks his support. A plan is hatched. Use the Friends case to see off the very body and its boss about to pronounce on the dodgy decorations question and the holidays. Friend saved. Tormentor defenestrated. New body established to save 20 or so of his other chums as well, also facing investigation. And, well, Bob's your uncle. He's cleared. They're all cleared. And in an early election, he romps to a second victory. Two of the most extraordinary miscalculations in the tale. The public dislike the whiff of sleaze as much as they dislike sleaze itself. And even loyal MPs don't like to be told something that to any fair-minded person just seems wrong. Ergo, the plot failed spectacularly, and in very short order, Downing Street advisers are in the frame. The Chief Whip is in the frame. The Leader of the House of Commons is in the frame. The PM is said to be seething. His and his party's polling is sharply down, with that ineffective opposition now within striking distance of him, with sensible, respected Tory MPs in open revolt. You can almost hear some young whippersnapper in Number 10 saying, "Oh, well, that went well." Now, it's important not to tar them all with the same brush. Sir Peter Bottomley, the father of the House and an old friend of mine, said, quotes, "It's just not right." Some of the youngsters who came in 2019 agreed. The Tory majority of 79 slipped to just 18 in the crucial Save Paterson vote. The silence and lack of order paper waving as that result was read out had some honour and not a little dignity. The Labour cries of shame seemed appropriate and could have been expended to shame there isn't an election tomorrow. Now, in the 1970s, I wanted to be an MP, to strive for a better Britain and a better world. My close friend Charles Clarke did too. Now, while I ended up on television, he did become an MP and a cabinet minister. We'd talked a lot about it all in the early days, and I swear we never even considered the pay or the opportunities to further feather our beds that it might just offer, with cash for questions, lobbying, or any of it. And I am sure that there are many on all sides of the House who took that view and take that view before they stood for election and having been elected, be it back in the day or as recently as 2019. But something now stinks. Something is wrong and something needs doing. And it's not just the Tories. There have been serial cases of wrongdoing across the House and across the years. So today I'm asking, what can we do to rebuild trust in politics? And joining me first to discuss this is an old friend of mine, Sir Alastair Graham, former chair of the Committee on Standards in Public Life. He and I first met one another when he was a senior trade unionist and a world that is familiar with dodgy dealings itself. Alastair, great to see you. Blunt question, is the whole system bent?
No, I don't think it is. The fact that the Prime Minister could only get a majority of 18 when in fact, in theory, he has a majority of 79 in the House of Commons to push through the amendment and to suspend the suspension of Owen Paterson, I think shows us that there are many MPs in the Conservative Party and in other parties as well who want to do a decent job on behalf of the public and were seriously embarrassed by what they were being asked to do and refused to do it.
Statement of the blindingly obvious, then, that if the wrong people get in, whether they're Tories, Labour or Liberals, then public life can appear to them to be a cash machine.
Yes, that's the danger. We've seen issues with ministers who've left the government and attracted very high salaries in the private sector. We had the David Cameron lobbying scandal recently, which shows that some people do end up being concerned about their financial situation rather than the wider public interest. And then this is not a new issue, of course. If you go back to somebody like Lloyd George, who was seen as an excellent Prime Minister, but in fact worked very hard to build up his own personal financial situation.
Do we attract the right people then? Because you and I have been in this game for long enough to know that we count on all sides of the House many men and women who are good friends, most importantly because they are good people. How do we attract more of the right people and keep the wrongans out?
Well, that's a good question. I don't know if I have a simple answer to it, because following the pay and expenses scandal, we do now have an independent body, called IPSA, the Independent Parliamentary Standards Authority, who determine the pay and expenses of MPs. And that's how Gordon Brown dealt with that particular scandal, by taking it outside of the control of MPs. And that arrangement, I think, has worked rather well. The question comes, do we have to do the same as far as disciplinary matters? Though it's not so easy to push to an outside body. But in the end, what people, I think, are looking for is decent, competent government by people who have got obvious integrity, which, of course, we know has to be built up over a period of time.
If the Speaker was to phone you up this afternoon, a good man himself, incidentally, let's get that on the record, Lindsay Hoyle, jolly good MP when he was an MP, now Speaker as well, and said, Alastair, you've been in this game for an awfully long time. Give me two things that you would want done now via a Speaker's conference, call it what you will, that can clean this place up. What would you say to Lindsay?
Well, the first thing I would say is if you're keeping an internal disciplinary system, which is what most MPs will want, then you've got 7 lay members on the Standards Committee. Make sure they have a vote. And also make the chair of that Standards Committee a senior, experienced lay person rather than a member of Parliament. Though I'm not critical of Chris Bryant, I thought he did a brilliant job in the House of Commons explaining why the suspension of Owen Paterson was necessary. That's one thing I would do. The second thing is we do have to try and tighten up the rules as far as lobbying is concerned. Whether it's for MPs, and large numbers of MPs at the moment have got second jobs and receive money for those second jobs, though they are debarred from lobbying on behalf of the people who are paying them. But of course, Owen Paterson was paid and did lobby. So I'd tighten those rules in a very strong way.
Alastair, great to see you. Thanks very much indeed for breaking into your Saturday. I know you've been a busy man these last 72 hours, but good to see you, and I hope you and yours are all well. Good to see you. Thank you very much indeed. So Alastair Graham there, a good friend of mine, saying that there are many good MPs. Let's not lose sight of that. But the committee keeping an eye on them has 7 lay members. They should get a vote, not just offer an opinion. And from their number, although Chris Bryant is a good and noble man, should provide the chair. That's a really great start. And he also says expenses broadly are sorted out now, but he wants to tighten the rules on lobbying. So if somebody says, I run this brilliant company, I'll give you 50 grand a year if you just say a word for me now and then, that needs to be tightened up. In my humble opinion, as you'll hear at 2 o'clock, it should be banned. But that's Alastair Graham's thoughts. Joe Twynham is the founder and director of Delta Poll, a public opinion consultancy, making a big mark in the polling game, I should say. Great to see you, Joe. Historically,
good to see you.
Historically, how bad is the case of Owen Paterson?
Well, in terms of overall behaviour, it certainly is not good by historic terms. But in terms of public opinion, it's likely to be viewed, well, shall we say, with some negativity when people are presented with the details in terms of the artificial construction of a survey, for instance. But in terms of the wider public, is it going to have a difference to voting intention, for instance? I think it will have less of an impact than, say, the Dominic Cummings incident with Barnard Castle. I think it will have less of an impact than even the David Cameron lobbying story, neither of which had a particularly long-term impact on the trends. My suspicion is that if it were a sex scandal, or if it were something easily understood along the lines of an MP buying a duck house on expenses, it would be something that the public could relate to very easily. But I think the complexities and obscurities around lobbying and the fine detail of this story make it more difficult for the public to latch onto. And I assume that is what Boris Johnson and his team were hoping when it came to their manoeuvres last week. They thought that they effectively could get away with it.
I mean, it is intriguing, as Alastair Graham was saying, that we live here in 2021 where a company can say, here's 50 grand to an MP and say, yeah, put a good case for me, not only on the floor of the House, but with ministers and special advisers. I mean, I've been in this game for an awfully long time, and it is jaw-dropping that that is still allowed within certain regulations that occasionally get breached. But that it is allowed is laughable in a democracy.
Yes, and I think many of the British public would agree, and the fact that it's still allowed after so many of these incidents, that I think would be a particular rib basher for many of the public who hear about these things time and again, and so it would niggle with them that time and again we hear about people of various different levels of seniority of various different parties being embroiled in these actions, and so reform is something for which there would be public support. But the nature of that reform and the detail around that reform, that's not really something that the British public are particularly clued up on. Understandably, given the complexities of the situation, if you were to say to people, should MPs be able to work with charities, for instance, to put forward their case, and should they be paid for that? I think in some circumstances people would be a lot more positive towards that than they would be towards other circumstances. So it does get complicated quite quickly.
I bumped into David Chidgey yesterday when I was out shopping, now Lord Chidgey, but of course famously the Liberal Democrat who had a triumph in Eastleigh all those years ago in a by-election. And he was arguing in the House of Lords the other day about chalk streams and keeping them clean, and got a very positive response from the government. Nobody's paying him to do that. He's doing that because he cares about it with a passion. It is not beyond human imagination to do the right thing for the right reasons. But here's a final point to you, Joe. And we both love this game, and we're both Democrats to our pounding hearts. One thing that strikes me is a spin-off effect of this is for the hard left and the hard right, who can say, there you are, you see, parliamentary democracy, bourgeois democracy, as the Trots call it, simply doesn't work. And the anarchists say, there you go, don't vote, it only encourages them. Democracy, potentially, is in the dock.
Yes, that's absolutely right. And that's the real long-term concern with these things, because individual events probably won't have much of a turning point effect. They will be talking points, but not turning points. But the long-term cumulative effect of these one after another lets in people who can feed off the dissatisfaction, distrust, and disapproval, and they can be on either side of the spectrum and present not policies of their own, not things to make the country better, but simply the suggestion that they are not the established group, and therefore they should be selected. And that, in certain circumstances, as we have seen in other countries, can be a problem. But all I would say is that this is not a new phenomenon. And in 1834, when the Houses of Parliament caught fire, so memorably pictured by the painter Turner, crowds did gather on the other side of the Thames to cheer. So this is something that has been going on for some time and will, I'm sure, continue for some years yet.
And stretching the analogy, the great Augustus Welby Pugin raced back from Brighton to help rebuild the house, metaphorically perhaps, and politically too. Joe, a real pleasure. Thanks for breaking into your Saturday to talk to us. Look forward to talking to you again. That's Joe Twynham, founder and director of Delta Poll, one of the polling agencies really to look out for. Very, very thoughtful. There is some negativity amongst the public, but unlikely to have as much impact on voting as the Dominic Cummings scandal. Interestingly, he also finds it extraordinary that in the 21st century lobbying is still allowed and also feeding off the disquiet that we see at the moment are extremists, and perhaps that is the greatest single danger. We'll be continuing this conversation about trust in politics throughout the programme. At 2 o'clock, you'll hear my thoughts on the issue, but I really do want to hear what you think, and you have already been incredibly lively on Twitter. My gang outside stacking them all up, and we'll feed back the best, but keep them coming because you can easily knock somebody off the top if yours is even better. You can also email us at gbviews@gbnews.uk. As I say, you can do it via Twitter. We're also on Instagram, and we are on Facebook. You're watching Alastair Stewart and Friends, and we've lots more coming up on the programme today. After the break, we will be crossing live to a climate protest as rallies take place across the country. But first, let's take a look at the weather.
For northeast England, a cloudy and windy afternoon is on the cards, although not as wet as for those in the northwest. On the mild side again, thanks to the southwest winds. A windy afternoon for southern Scotland with scattered showers blowing in from the west and northwest. A risk of coastal gales at times, especially in and around any showers. For Northern Ireland, it will also be a windy day with a mixture of sunny spells and scattered showers. They'll mainly affect northern and western parts, highs of 12 degrees. Staying windy this evening with rain or showers and some severe gales developing across parts of northern Scotland. And that's how your weather is shaping up for the rest of the day.
You're watching GB News live across the UK and the world on our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We are here for you. Don't forget to join our YouTube community by clicking on that subscribe button.
And if you want the GB News app, you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you, so email us.
gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else. I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
Welcome back. You're watching Alastair Stewart and Friends here on GB News, and we're talking about trust in politics. And before we go on to the next story, I have to read out now David Chambers. Rebuild trust in politics, ? Easy, he says. Dissolve Parliament, elect 650 brand new MPs. No MP can stand for election more than 4 times. Eradicate the House of Lords, full stop. Pay MPs £100,000 a year and remove the expenses con. That'll be a good start. Failing all of this, blow it up. Now, I only include the last bit because I'm not encouraging violence or anything like that, but that was the point Joe Twynham ended on when Parliament burnt down in the 19th century. Folk gathered to cheer it on. Let's please not get to that point, so keep those emails and those tweets coming in. Now, all eyes have been on Glasgow this past week with the COP26 conference well underway, but today the focus has shifted to the protesters who are demonstrating across the UK. Our reporter Alice Porter is at a protest on her patch in central London. So Alice, hi there. Oh, I can see, but tell us what's happening.
Hi there, good afternoon. Yeah, as you can hear, there are hundreds of people that have come here outside the Bank of England, and they're going to be rallying here. I've got so many different organisations that have come together. There's hundreds and hundreds of people, and then they're going to be moving through the centre of London before going up into Trafalgar Square. And I'm joined by Abigail, who's one of the protesters here today. Thank you so much for joining me.
You're welcome.
Tell me, why did you want to come along today to this protest?
So I've been protesting for about 2 years now around the climate crisis and the ecological emergency, basically to put pressure on organisations and the government to actually act, to stop greenwashing and pretending, and to do things to stop burning fossil fuels, to stop extracting fossil fuels, and to support the other countries that need the economic support when we move to a new way of life, and we need a just transition for that to work. So there's lots of issues there. There's a lot of things that the government needs to be doing. All the governments around the world, they need to stick to what they agreed to at COP25, and so we're here to keep pressure on them.
Now, we're standing right at this sort of financial hub of London, really. We've got the Bank of England behind me, we've got the Exchange there, it's very much in the heart of the city, and this is an area you know very well, because this has been an area that you've been working in terms of your job. And how did that impact how you feel about climate change?
So I felt massively let down by the government. I worked as a management consultant for most of my life, or even before that in the city. So I worked for lots and lots of corporations. I used to fly every week to Switzerland, and people used to say to me, "Oh gosh, do you not worry about your carbon footprint?" And to be honest, I didn't understand what that meant. I didn't realise how bad it was. And I felt completely let down when I discovered what happened, how bad the climate situation is. I just assumed that if it was as bad as it is, I wouldn't be allowed to fly for ridiculous meetings, because corporations wouldn't want me to. The government wouldn't be letting people fly as frequently as I was. So when I realised how little the government and corporations were acting on this awful situation, I felt very let down. So I met some Extinction Rebellion protesters and then did some of my own research, and I had a lot of internal struggles around what I'd be doing. I've got a 17-year-old son. I feel very guilty for the world that we're leaving him. And I felt that I needed to get out on the street, because by not going and protesting, I feel like I'm saying it's okay that you're doing nothing. So for me, I have to keep going out. I have to keep protesting. I was in Glasgow this week because I need them to understand how important it is that we actually act and we stop greenwashing.
Well, Abigail, it was very nice to meet you, and thank you for joining me. And I think it's really interesting, this idea of, the fact that you used to fly a lot and now you don't. And I think a lot of us reflect on our own behaviour and the way that we sort of led a life. So, really interesting. Thanks for being so sort of honest about the way you lived your life. Obviously, things are a bit different for you now. Yeah. Appreciate you giving us this time. So I'm going to be here for the next sort of hour or so. so, and then we're going to be moving through the centre of London to Trafalgar Square, and we'll be there at about sort of 3 o'clock. I don't think it's quite the numbers that we've seen in Glasgow, but I think there's definitely a sense of people here in London who are wanting to have their voices heard, who maybe haven't been up to Glasgow and want to show how they feel about climate change.
Indeed so. Alice, thank you very much indeed. Alice Porter there on her patch in central London, and as she said, we'll be crossing around the country to talk to other folk who are engaged in that protest as well. You're watching Alastair Stewart and Friends. Plenty more still to come this afternoon, including Stanley Johnson, the father of the Prime Minister, Boris Johnson. He'll be here in the studio talking climate action, his new book, and plenty more. But first, let's bring you right up to date with the latest news headlines. Here's Amelia.
I'm Amelia Harper. Here are the latest headlines. Thousands of people are gathering in Glasgow ahead of a march calling for more action on climate change. 50,000 people are expected to march through the city again this afternoon, where the UN COP26 climate summit is taking place. Demonstrations are also happening in Newcastle, Cardiff, Manchester and London. People will be able to book their COVID-19 booster jabs 5 months after their second dose from Monday. Currently, boosters can only be booked after 6, but the booking system is changing next week to speed up the rollout ahead of the winter. People will only be able still to receive the vaccine 6 months after their second dose. 12 people have been arrested after hundreds of anti-establishment protesters clashed with police in London on Bonfire Night. 8 police officers were injured after fireworks were thrown at them in Parliament Square. Demonstrators were taking part in the Million Mask March, protesting against coronavirus restrictions. An effigy of the Prime Minister Boris Johnson was also burned in Trafalgar Square. Now, there are some flashing images in this next story. At least 8 people have died in a crowd surge at a festival in Houston in Texas. Several others were also injured at Astroworld Festival on Friday evening, while rapper Travis Scott was performing on stage. 17 people were taken to hospital, including 11 who were in cardiac arrest. Elsewhere, at least 92 people have been killed after an oil tanker exploded near Sierra Leone's capital. It happened when large crowds gathered to collect fuel leaking from a road traffic accident in Freetown. A giant fireball could be seen burning in the night sky. President Julius Maada Bio, who was in Scotland attending COP26, called it a horrendous loss of life. A second unnamed player of Asian heritage has come forward alleging racial abuse at Yorkshire County Cricket Club. It comes amid criticism of the club's response to racism experienced by Azim Rafiq. Yesterday, Yorkshire chairman Roger Hutton was one of several board members to resign. A woman has been arrested after a paddleboarding incident on a river in Wales in which 4 people died. The arrest follows the death of the 4th person who had been in hospital following the incident. The suspect was arrested on suspicion of gross negligence, manslaughter, and has been released under investigation. You're up to date. I'll be back with more of today's main top stories at the top of the hour.
You're watching GB News live across the UK and the world on our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We are here for you. Don't forget to join our YouTube community by clicking on that subscribe button.
And if you want the GB News app, you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you, so email us.
gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of 2 wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else. I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
Welcome back. You're watching Alastair Stewart and Friends on GB News. Now, all eyes have been on Glasgow for COP26 over the past week or so, with more of the conference yet to come. Now, my next guest has two particular reasons for being intrigued. One is he has a genuine passion for all things climate change and the environment, writing a number of learned books on the subject. Also, he is the father of the Prime Minister, who made quite a splash himself. I'm delighted to be joined in the studio by Stanley Johnson, author, international ambassador of the Conservative Environment Network, and, of course, the father of our Prime Minister. It's good to see you. I was mulling over, this programme's called Alastair Stewart and Friends. I think the last time that we rubbed up, as it were, against one another was when we were reading poetry for Marjorie Wallace and her brilliant Sane charity. Do you remember?
You are so right, and I chose Ulysses as my poem. It's Little Prophets, the Idle King. On these barren flags I meet and dole, etc. And you chose something. You chose the battle going from Aix to Ghent.
Browning, how they brought the news from Ghent. They sprang to the stirrup and Boris and he. Boris, talking of which, Boris, how's he doing? It seems to be unravelling a little at the moment.
Well, I don't know. I haven't been following the thing in much detail.
When did you last talk to him?
I don't go into those sort of details. Absolutely don't.
Were you to have spoken to him recently? What did you talk about?
No, I'm not talking about that. Look, I don't think anything's unravelling. I think he's done a fantastic job. I think, if you want me to say, has he got this climate change thing going? He has got it going. Why is the whole world talking about it? Because the government has put unbelievable amount of effort into it. And this is a Conservative government.
I don't dispute that. And you and I have talked about this before. And Margaret Thatcher, maligned for many things, but was the first climate change Tory Prime Minister. And Boris has sought to follow in her footsteps. But the irony for him is, and it's not just the enemy, as it were. The Guardian calls for new investigation into PM's flat. Voters warn Boris, you're losing your grip. And that's the Express, incidentally. And the Tory MPs turn on Johnson. It's become a dangerous distraction for something that he really does care passionately about. Got to be sorted out.
I'm sure it will be sorted out. I mean, committees will be established. Well, one committee will do it. The thing is sub judice. Yeah. In the meantime, we've got 10 more days, or 8 more days of COP26. And, that to me is far more important than what you might call the minutiae. And I often suspect there's a hidden agendas here anyway.
Fascinating. I'm going to end on that because hidden agenda, in a sense, is one of the themes of this book. And we do not exist simply to promote books. There are many that come our way and we choose not to do them particularly. But this is truly excellent. It really is. It's called From an Antique Land, which is a reference to Cambodia. And the antiquities of that fantastic country, hidden deep in the jungle, are part of the story. But the real story is about cover-ups, collusions and plots.
It is a little bit. Of course, we were talking poetry earlier. From an Antique Land is also, from Shelley's Ozymandias. I met a traveller from an antique land. I thought, irresistible title. Yes, it's layers within layers. I've been writing novels for a very long time. I think my first novel was published in 1968.
11, 12?
This is the 11th.
Yeah.
This is the 11th. The first was published the first was called Gold Rain, published even before 68. But then in 1968, I wrote a book called Panther Jones for President, which was indeed about an Afro-American becoming President of the United States.
So what fired you up to look back at Pol Pot, the Khmer Rouge, US-Chinese relationships? Was it the beauty of Cambodia or the attraction of geopolitics?
It was probably the attraction of geopolitics set in that setting. And I was very fascinated by really the thought here you had the US, which did suffer in 1975, a fairly dramatic defeat in Vietnam. In the meantime, you have Pol Pot establishing itself in Cambodia. And I was saying to myself, well, what was the links between the US and Pol Pot? I don't want to give too much away here, but of course it is layers within layers, and I have had, some experience of complicated plots, and I love complicated plots, but this one for me was actually slightly different because it was very much focused also on a young lady who was a child when she left Cambodia, fleeing from Pol Pot, and 25 years later gets an opportunity to go back and find out what might have happened to her father.
I'm going to stop you there because otherwise you're going to be an author being an enemy to himself and give the plot away.
Oh, yes. Thank you.
I merely underline the fact that I think it's brilliant. The Chronicle said it's a brilliant account, alternative account of recent events. How easily my trade and your son's former trade forget about these great events. Whether it's, are we going to lose Christmas? That's suddenly taken over by COP26. And we're now wrestling with what's going on in Ethiopia. But Cambodia really was a stain on humanity and the killing fields. If I may say so, it's great through a novel that it's resuscitated.
Well, I mean, people have done it better than I have done it, that's for sure. I mean, John Swain wrote a very good book. There was a very good film called The Killing Fields. So I don't want to pretend I'm using the Killing Fields thing, the Pol Pot event, as part of a plot. Your point about journalists and the stories moving on. Well, what is it? The caravan. The dogs bark and the caravan moves on.
Absolutely.
That's probably a poem too. No, yes, it is right that we should, because for a very long time, those people were still in power. As a matter of fact, I mean, they are to some extent still in power in Cambodia today. And it does very much intrigue me, this balance of relationships between Russia, China, Cambodia, Vietnam. And in the sense, because the whole China-America issue is now the dominant issue in world politics.
There's a brilliant quote from Robert Jessup, who is your character, who has the cover of being a very senior academic, but in reality is spook within spook within spook. I was very, very drawn to Jessup. I know a few Jessups.
That's right.
But you have Jessup saying how the United States and China work things out over the next few years is going to define the pattern of world events. The book reminds us that in the 70s, Ted Heath was chatting up China, Nixon was chatting up China, and now they're the bête noirs.
I couldn't agree with you more. I actually went to China in 1975 as part of the very first, as a non-official EU delegation. We travelled all around. We went from Beijing to Shenyang to Xianxing and Wuxi and Shuxi and all sorts of places. And for me, that was utterly fascinating. Mao was still in power. Now, your point is a very good one. We've seen this utter volte-face in the last few years in British politics, whereas the golden era was Cameron and Osborne going to talk to Xi Jinping, him coming back, the lunch in a pub in Chequers and so on and so forth. I am very worried at the volte-face which is going on. I think it's tremendously important that we take a real hard look at what's going on.
I don't dispute that, but another friend of mine, Tom Tugendhat, has also been very consistent on this point, saying, let's not go in with eyes closed, let's go in with eyes wide open. And the Chinese know exactly what they're doing as imperialists in Africa for raw materials and labour, but they also know exactly what they're doing with Huawei here and investing in our nuclear power stations. It's no different to what Britain did when they were the imperialists 200 years ago. We need to keep a weather eye on the new ambitions of what will soon be the biggest economy in the world.
Yeah, of course we do. But I don't think we need to undervalue some of the efforts they are making. Just take the climate change thing. If you actually add it up, China is investing in terms of dealing with climate change, more than the EU and the US combined. I looked up the figure, $3.4 trillion over the next decade. Well, that's more than with the EU. The EU is doing more than the US. It is taking it seriously. They're still, in terms of per capita emissions, way below.
Yeah. I mean, they're also 6 times bigger than us in population terms. I mean, the EU, I mean, not us.
I completely agree. So, yes, this is... I think we've just got to be careful to get a balance. Of course, we need to be careful that we're not, giving away things we don't need to give away. But the way I look at it, China did make a gallop for a quote-unquote development, and that gallop was partly encouraged by us in the sense of our huge import of stuff from China. And we, of course, prided ourselves that we've reduced our emissions. Well, one of the reasons we reduced our emissions, we closed down our manufacturing industry.
Yes.
If you see what I mean, as Dieter Helm says, if you really want to get to net zero, we'll just close everything down.
Yeah, and under Deng Xiaoping, the Chinese were well ahead of the game, and they spotted that, which is one of the main reasons why they are. We're heading towards a break, so I just want to shift a little bit, but want you to hang around. I just chortled loudly. I mean, there are bits in this brilliant book that are seriously upsetting and deeply frightening, like the killing fields, but also the interrogation centre and the pictures on the wall and what have you. But here's the real Stanley Johnson, and I just love it. Robert Jessup, who I've also quoted already, observes, Europe just keeps reinventing itself. And then there's a French barman who's directing the journalistic hero to find one of his great sources. The French barman, just almost as a throwaway line, says, "Oh, that's the problem with the common market," which was, of course, the EEC before it was the EU. "We've all lost control of our borders." You can't even write a book, Stanley Johnson, without whacking in a couple of lines on the EEC.
Do you know, I wanted to get a Frenchman in there because go back to Cambodia. What was the terrific shock for the French? It was losing Dien Bien Phu way back in 1954. That was a psychological shock. So I had quite fun in the end, giving the French a bit of a seat at the table in the final evolution of the story. Yes, I mean, the EU remains absolutely fundamental in this relationship. So the funny thing is, Britain now has to work out how we deal with the EU and with actual things like China.
Do you, as you observe these things, having been an MEP yourself, of course, and you were a Remainer who then flipped at the last moment and thought, no, the penny has now dropped, I want out. But
hold on, I only said I want out once the British people had voted out. I said, no, I never flipped before the. Oh, God, absolutely not.
Oh, so the Democrat in you said, yes, we voted this way. All right, fine, understood. But cast your mind back to only a few weeks, the row between Poland over its judiciary and Brussels, and now the row between the French and Brussels over fishing and what have you. Many serious commentators are saying there are the signs here, as David Cameron warned Merkel, that this thing ain't going to hold together.
Well, you raise the issue of, does EU law trump domestic law? And the answer is, I grew up in all my time in Brussels thinking, indeed it did. And that was what was called pooling of sovereignty. There are certain times when you're going to be overruled. Some countries had doubt about it. The German kept on looking at their constitutional court and saying, but on the whole, I was perfectly ready to accept that the ECJ and the European Commission would, in the end, say...
European Court of Justice, ECJ.
Yes, exactly, thank you. We say what needs to happen. Well, this turned out to be the crux point for British voters. They didn't want it. They want their MPs to have the final say on absolutely everything. They don't like the idea of shared sovereignty. Well, I accept that too. That's what the British people want.
But if the sauce is right for the goose, it's good for the gander. We're the goose. We've already said that. And now are the Polish going to be the gander? I mean, could the Polish say? Because remember, Roman Catholic, quite traditionalist country. If Brussels is going to be telling us via the European Court of Justice and Euro law that we must do things, there are some things that are so fundamental to the average Polish man and woman that this we will not have.
They'll have to make that decision themselves, and that decision...
might it be catastrophic for Brussels?
It would, I think, be very catastrophic for Brussels, because Poland is by far the largest of what you might call the new adherents, I mean, in terms of economics and in terms of its sheer weight. I think the Poles will think very carefully about it because they have benefited enormously economically from being a member of the EU.
The final question, 10 seconds. Please reassure me, Stanley, that you are not going back to your heritage in Turkey or going back to your place in Greece or you may get French citizenship to which you're entitled, but you are going to stay here, aren't you?
Well, absolutely, I'm sure of that. I'm going to go to Glasgow tomorrow, by the way.
All right. Stay with us, if you'd be so kind. Much more to talk about, but for the time being, absolutely fascinating. So fascinating that I've actually lost the thing that controls how... Oh, no, here it is. You see, I was locked in conversation and I still have to use this bit of kit. You are watching Alastair Stewart and Friends. Please don't go anywhere. Stanley, as I've just said, will be back chatting climate change, politics, and a little more after the break. So see you in just a few moments.
Well done.
You're watching GB News live across the UK and the world on our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We are here for you. Don't forget to join our YouTube community by clicking on that subscribe button.
And if you want the GB News app, you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you, so email us.
gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else. I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
Welcome back to me and to my little machine. You're watching Alastair Stewart and Friends on GB News. Stanley Johnson is still with me here in the studio, as promised. Before the break, we were chatting geopolitics. Let's now talk a little more about COP26. You were in yesterday, and I watched it, or the first part of it at least, with Arlene, and you were talking a lot about that. I tweeted last night that I had no objection to Greta Thunberg going blah, 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 and it being reported without challenge, because it's what she said, it's what she thinks, that's fine. But last night on the news, it was reported that she said, nothing has been achieved here, nothing at all, and that wasn't challenged. To me, that's fundamentally wrong.
You're right. I would challenge that. I mean, of course, it's not over yet, but if you can tick off things which have already come out. There is, for example, the thing Zach Goldsmith worked so hard on, which is the Leaders' Declaration on Forests and Land Use. I've been working on that forest thing since I left the EU to work for FAO. Number one. Number two, methane.
Yes, crucial.
Methane, a crucial thing. Actually, 90 times more poisonous.
And just to remind folk at home, particularly those who may be younger, you and I go back far enough to remember that much of this debate started when we talked about the ozone layer and holes in it. Well, that's all about methane.
Absolutely right. 1976 was the Montreal Protocol, the Vienna Convention Montreal Protocol. Thirdly, I think what Mark Carney was doing on corralling the financial world.
Yes.
I'd like to go further. I'd like to say not only should we lay an obligation on on companies to have their own scheme for getting to net zero, but there also ought to be penalties if they fail to,
Yes.
put those schemes into effect. This, of course, is something we do have to do in conjunction, I would say, with the EU as well. So, we've got.
But would you have a word with Greta and say, be a bit more balanced?
Well, you've got to hand it to her. I do hand it to her. Why has this movement really taken off? It is partly because what she did with her Fridays for the Future, 2 or 3 years ago, has really caught the imagination of youth. And you've got to see. It's our generation, actually, I'm much older than you, which has partly caused the problem in the same way it's our world which has caused the problem. So we've got an intergenerational thing and we've got a north-south thing. And that is what Greta has focused on. And I think the young people, in the end, are going to drive the politicians. Before this week is over, I think the government, all governments, are going to see there is such a powerful movement out there.
And they're all voters or will be within very short order.
And they're going to have, they came to Glasgow with their what's called national determined contributions. I bet you by the end of this time, they're going to say, well, look, we think we better retweak. No good saying, well, we're going to come out of Glasgow with 2.7. Yeah. They'll get it done.
You mentioned big business and big money, and last weekend, the Prince of Wales wrote a very, very thoughtful piece in the Telegraph, saying we need to corral the private sector, we need to corral private wealth. Are you totally comfortable with this movement accepting billions from the likes of Amazon's Bezos and Elon Musk and Gates and what have you? Do you think that's the way forward in the same way that Vanderbilt and Getty and what have you in previous oil generations did it? Do you trust them?
None of those big ones are going to be able to exempt themselves from these rules I was talking about. They're also going to have to get to net zero and so on. No, we have to have them. If you actually look at the figures, it is a scandal, really, that 100 billion figure, which was promised in 2009 in Copenhagen, we're still not there. And when you consider that it's actually a very small amount relative to the amount we've all spent on COVID, this country has spent 400 billion pounds on COVID. And if you see what I mean. So see it in that context, the amount of money which we're being asked to raise for climate change to help the developing countries who didn't, after all, cause this problem is tiny.
Yeah, all right.
And we have to do it.
We have to leave it there. It was a real pleasure. Let me remind folk that this is worth reading, not because it's by my friend Stanley Johnson, although that maybe helps, but because it really is an intriguing dip back into one of the darkest periods of our history, but also it's a handbook in how to watch what the superpowers are really up to. It's excellent.
Thank you very much.
Thanks so much for your time.
Thank you so much for having me.
And for talking about Boris, and for talking about climate change, and for talking about From an Antique Lamb. Stanley, we'll see you again soon.
Pleasure.
Stanley Johnson there, and you are indeed watching Alastair Stewart and Friends, and he is one I include within that category here on GB News. Plenty more to come. Do stay with us. Loved it. Sorry, we're just saying goodbye to Stanley. I do beg your pardon. Take care. Hello and welcome. I'm Alastair Stewart, and there's plenty more coming up over the next 2 hours, including more on our big question of the day: how do we rebuild trust in politics? But first, the latest headlines with Amelia Harper.
I'm Amelia Harper. This is your news at 1 o'clock. Thousands of people are gathering in Glasgow ahead of a march calling for more action on climate change. Up to 50,000 people are expected to attend the demonstration in the city where the UN Climate Summit is taking place. It's part of the COP26 coalition's Global Day of Action for Climate Justice. Demonstrations will also take place across the UK, including Newcastle, Cardiff, Belfast, Manchester and London. GB News reporter Alice Porter spoke to a protester in London.
We do things to stop burning fossil fuels, to stop extracting fossil fuels, and to support the other countries that need the economic support when we move to a new way of life, and we need a just transition for that to work. So there's lots of issues there. There's a lot of things that the government needs to be doing. All the governments around the world, they need to stick to what they agreed to at COP25, and so we're here to keep pressure on them.
People will be able to book their COVID-19 booster jabs 5 months after their second dose from Monday. Currently, boosters can only be booked after 6, but that booking system is changing next week to speed up the rollout of the jabs ahead of winter. People will still only be able to receive the vaccine 6 months after their second dose. Now, there are some flashing images in this next story. At least 8 people have died in a crowd surge at a festival in Houston in Texas. Several others were also injured at Astroworld Festival on Friday evening while rapper Travis Scott was performing on stage. 17 people were taken to hospital, including 11 people who were in cardiac arrest. At least 92 people have been killed after an oil tanker exploded near Sierra Leone's capital. It happened when large crowds gathered to collect fuel leaking after a road traffic accident in Freetown. A giant fireball could be seen burning in the night sky. President Julius Maada Bio, who's in Scotland attending COP26, called it a horrendous loss of life. A knife attack on a high-speed train in Germany has severely injured 3 people. The train was travelling between Regensburg and Nuremberg when the attack happened at around 9 a.m. local time. A 27-year-old man of Syrian nationality has been arrested, but there's not yet any information about a possible motive. Sir John Major has called the government's approach to the row about Owen Paterson shameful. The former Conservative Prime Minister said the government's action was damaging and that sleaze is unacceptable. The Prime Minister was forced to do a U-turn on the planned 30-day suspension of Mr Paterson over a serious breach of lobbying rules. A second unnamed player of Asian heritage has come forward alleging racial abuse at Yorkshire County Cricket Club. It comes amid criticism of the club's response to racism experienced by Azim Rafiq. Yesterday, Yorkshire chairman Roger Hutton was one of several board members to resign. Speaking on GB News, former England bowler Monty Panesar said an extensive investigation is needed.
These are obviously, quite shocking and really deep claims because, Rafiq did say that continually the people at Yorkshire were using the P word and they've kind of referred it to as banter. And they're such close friends that, this is such a complex and complicated, situation that, I think thorough investigation and a fair, investigation for all the parties involved, needs to be done.
A woman has been arrested after a paddleboarding incident on a river in Wales in which 4 people died. It comes after police confirmed the death of the 4th person, 41-year-old Andrea Powell from Bridgend, who had been in hospital. The suspect from South Wales has been arrested on suspicion of gross negligence manslaughter. They have since been released under investigation. The bosses of 5 supermarket chains are promising to halve the environmental impact of a weekly food shop by the end of this decade. Chief executives from Tesco, Sainsbury's, Waitrose, Co-op and M&S say they'll work with the Worldwide Fund for Nature to reduce natural destruction. The supermarkets have promised to submit environmental impact data annually to the Worldwide Fund. 2 hyenas have tested positive for coronavirus in the first cases confirmed among animals worldwide. Samples were taken from Denver Zoo in the United States after several lions and 2 tigers also tested positive for the virus. The zoo said the hyenas have an occasional cough, but they are expected to make a full recovery. I'll be bringing you more headlines in half an hour. Now let's get back to Alastair Stewart and friends.
Thanks, Amelia. I'm Alastair Stewart, and until 3 o'clock I'll be keeping you company along with friends and friendly guests. Still to come, in around an hour you'll be hearing my take on our main discussion today after a week dominated by accusations of sleaze in Westminster. What can we do to rebuild trust in politics? Plus, we'll bring you an exclusive report on the number of children at risk of being sexually exploited in Rotherham. And ABBA is back. Their first album in 40 years has shot to the top of the music charts across the globe. So what's the secret to their success? I'll be speaking to a good friend of mine and of the show, Nick Stewart, about all of that and more. But first, let's return to the stench of sleaze that's hung over Westminster this week. Much of the plot has centred on the Conservative MP Owen Paterson, who stood accused and indeed was convicted of improper lobbying. but he claimed that he hadn't had a fair hearing nor been allowed to bring in his own defence witnesses. Well, the Prime Minister came riding to his defence, but his plan grossly miscalculated the public's feelings about sleaze, and the result was a spectacular failure. However, the issue goes much deeper than just Boris Johnson, Owen Paterson, or indeed the events of this week. And it's not just Tories. There have been serial cases of wrongdoing across the House and across the years. But it is important not to tar all politicians with the same brush, because so many of them got into the job simply to strive for a better Britain and a better world. So today I'm asking, what can we do to rebuild that trust in politics? I'm delighted to be joined now by Justin Tomlinson, who is indeed a Conservative Member of Parliament, sits for North Swindon. We've asked him on, there he is, because he came number 2 in Change.org's People Power Index before the last election and was ranked the highest Conservative politician. While he gets slightly embarrassed, the index ranks MPs on how their constituents rate them on things like responsiveness and openness. Why can't we have more like you, Justin?
That's very kind. So I just realised you're covering ABBA later on, and my wife, who's watching that, will be more interested in the ABBA thing coming up. But you know, in all seriousness, I'm very, very lucky, and all of us, all 650 MPs, must never lose sight of the fact how lucky we are to have such an amazing opportunity to represent our respective communities. Even after 11 years as an MP, and we have many ups and downs, I still pinch myself when I go in there. I never studied politics. Through, like all of us with our careers, lucky breaks here and there have allowed me to have that wonderful opportunity, and I take great pride. I take my role very, very seriously. I work hard, as do, you know, pretty much every one of my colleagues on all sides of the House, and we all collectively have to do our bit to restore faith into politics. Because I arrived in 2010 after the expenses scandal. We know what we've got to do, and we've got to do it better.
Know what you've got to do, completely understand that, and we've been talking all along about what to do to get it better, and people like Alastair Graham say more lay members with votes on the committees that keep an eye on you, tighter rules on lobbying. Joe Twynham said the public are upset about this, furious about Cummings and Trust, and it's about lobbying. What I don't understand is whether or not it's being cleverer about the men and women who get into the place, or whether it's being more brutal about policing the place. What's your view?
Well, I think, first of all, as a broad point, a good parliament is a diverse parliament, different careers, different backgrounds, different ages, different skill sets being brought forward. And I think with each election that goes by, you are seeing a more diverse parliament, and that is a good thing. I also think wherever possible, you should have local residents representing their local communities. I'm very proud to live in North Swindon. After this interview, I'll be off to the football, and people will tell me whether it's been a good or a bad week in Parliament. I have a sneaking feeling I know what they will be saying. But also, you're right to highlight the need to police things. We're no different to any other profession. You have good people, you have people who don't live up to the expectations. You need scrutiny, you need transparency, and the government and Parliament collectively, because this is owned by Parliament, not by government in its own right, has increased both transparency and scrutiny. And that is a good thing, and we continue to review that, and we must do more in that area.
Marketing executive before you went into politics, how would you try to market your party after Pattinson and Johnson's response to it?
Well, it's not been a good week. We have to put our hands up, but it's not been a good week for Parliament at all. We're all tarnished by the same brush. And collectively, that's why I've said in my Swindon Advertiser article this week, I touched on this and said we've all got to collectively do better. But, you know, from my own perspective, I've never been a fan of heckling in the chamber. I never, ever mention my opponents or other parties in any of my literature. I take a view that either I'm good enough to represent the people of North Swindon or I don't deserve that opportunity. And I've got through 4 elections, and that's worked for me. And I just think we have to do that.
Justin,
not everybody's going to agree with everything you do, but you've got to take that in good spirit.
Sure, I apologise. I want to butt in on 2 things, only because the clock is against us. Would you agree with a ban on commercial lobbying and a ban on second jobs?
They're good questions to ask. I mean, we've brought in much tougher rules around lobbyists being registered, greater transparency. Are those rules perfect? I suspect not, and I suspect we have to have an open and honest, frank review of that. Around the second jobs, there is I don't have one, but there is the argument. We have doctors, we have nurses who are practicing, and you could make a very strong case that having those relevant skills, again, adds to a very diverse parliament. But I think we have to continue to be open and honest with a review of this. We all own the reputation of Parliament collectively. We do have to do much better.
Talk to you, Justin. Enjoy the footy, and I'll look out for that article in the, what was it, Swindon Advertiser or whatever it was.
That's the one.
Good. Great of you to find time for us. That's Justin Tomlinson, Tory Member of Parliament for North Swindon. We need a diverse Parliament, and by that he means class, economics and what have you. That needs to be protected. Local residents, perhaps, only as Members of Parliament. That's intriguing. But most importantly, we need to have a frank and open discussion now about lobbying and second jobs, and maybe that has to change. Good to talk to Justin there. I couldn't be more delighted to introduce my next guest, because it is Alastair Stewart and friends, and we're talking about politics and we're talking about integrity. Martin Bell is a former independent MP, sat for Tatton, sat on the House of Commons Standards Committee, and he and I rubbed shoulders on one or two occasions in the old days when we both had pens, pads and cameras in front of us. Martin, it's a personal pleasure to see you, and thanks for finding time for us. You've seen it all before. Is it worse now? Is it getting slightly better, or simply plus ça change?
I think this time it's a little bit worse, simply because of what has gone before. Lessons that should have been learned have not been learned. And this is the first time. I mean, I sat on that committee, the Standards Committee, for 3 years, so I've seen it from the other side. And when I was on it, and after I was on it, when it was a cross-party committee, and of course I was an independent, the judgments on individual MPs and the penalties imposed were always endorsed by the full House on the floor of the House. What was extraordinary last Wednesday is that for the first time, the government tried to intervene to protect one of its own. We hadn't seen that before, so if you're asking if things are worse, I think in that respect they are.
Absolutely vital point, and that indeed was at the heart of not whatever Owen did or didn't do, but the response to it. But in your view, and being a highly respected journalist, it helps inform your answer, perhaps. In your view, Martin, is this about bad people or a bad system?
This is not about bad people. I do honestly believe that most members of Parliament are there with the aim of benefiting their constituencies, their country and the world. But there are those whose appetites seem to be insatiable. I'm not among the majority who tends to think that the system's not strict enough. I think on the whole, it has delivered fair judgments over the years. But things have lately got out of hand, and I think this is going to be a wake-up call to everybody. You just had Justin Tomlinson on. I mean, it's not on both sides of the House, because actually the attempted cover-up came from one side of the House. I'm not making part of a political point, because I'm not a party. I was not a party political politician. But I think it's a wake-up call to all politicians. And I honestly believe that lobbying has to be... I mean, there's nothing wrong with lobbying, Alastair. I've lobbied on behalf of the salt industry because I had a salt mine in my constituency. What is wrong with lobbying is when money changes hands, and in this case, a lot of money changed hands.
Yeah. Final question, and I've asked one or two of my guests about it. You will have known Lindsay Hoyle, the Speaker, of course, when he was the Honourable Member for Chorley, and he's a delightful and honourable man. Martin Bell's phone rings this afternoon. It is Mr. Speaker. He says, Martin, you've been here, you've done it, you're now away from it all. Give me two things I need to do now via the Speaker's conference to clean this place up.
I think he, first of all, needs to defend the present system in place. And I think he needs to be more strict about some of the bad behaviour on the floor of the House. sometimes MPs do this themselves, the shouting, the waving of order papers. It's like a sort of bad day in a second-rate public school. I think we need more discipline, more civility in the House, and a control of extremist language. And this takes us back to Sir David Amess. That should have been a lesson to us all. What happens when the nastiness of politics takes over?
Indeed. So intriguing that you make the same point there as Justin just did about civility, a quality that is never out of place. A real honour and pleasure to see you, Martin. Look after yourself and keep in touch. Thank you very much indeed. A giant of the BBC in his day, Martin Bell, and also Member of Parliament for Tatton as a result of a previous episode of wrongdoing. Well, listening to both of those is the Prime Minister's anti-corruption champion, the Conservative Member of Parliament for Weston-super-Mare, John Penrose. John, I'm genuinely not being sarcastic, and you and I know each other. We've dined together at various charity events and what have you. I think many people will be amazed to learn that the Prime Minister has an anti-corruption champion.
And just to be clear, the point of being the anti-corruption champion, it's a role that's existed since Tony Blair was Prime Minister. It's unsalaried, it's unpaid, but it's aimed at trying to chase up all sorts of different things in the anti-corruption strategy. Yes, there's one of those too. It's a 5-year thing with about 130 different action points and deadlines right the way across government. So that's what my role is. It's about trying to improve the system, not about dealing with individual cases and there's no squad of detectives who report to me to deal with individual cases. That is rightly, and I think sensibly, handled by the police and by independent investigators. The last thing anybody should want, I think, is to have politically motivated prosecutions being run by anybody, including me.
Totally agree with that. And it's intriguing from Alastair Graham, Joe Twynham, the pollster, Justin Tomlinson, your colleague who was on just a moment ago, and the great Martin Bell, all making the point that it is more about the system than it is about the individuals. For every wrong-un, there's 100 good uns, or maybe that number's a bit generous, but you know what I think about this. It seems to me as an outsider that there are things that are so obvious and easy to do that you simply ban lobbying. You don't just have a register of it. You say, no, you may not take money from somebody to come into this place to try and push a particular cause. Registration is one thing, but just don't do it. And if you've got a job already as a doctor, like one or two of your colleagues, that's fine. But anything else, unless a lawyer, is simply not on. I mean, that could happen tomorrow.
Well, oddly, I think the rules already get pretty close to what you're describing anyway. The rules say that you can't accept money to lobby and then go and initiate a conversation with a minister about that particular topic. So quite a lot of this stuff is already banned and has been banned for some time. The question is what you do when, not if, you find a problem. Just simply because, like any other walk of life, as you rightly said, most MPs, like most doctors, like most business people, are doing it for the right reasons. But MPs are human, and there will always be a few bad apples. We hope not many. So you've got to have a process that deals with them when you find them.
Is the Prime Minister naive in these matters? Sitting next to us when we were at the dinner for Riding for the Disabled was your lovely wife, Dido Harding, who made the speech at that event. She was castigated over track and trace, not whether it was a good thing or a bad thing, but because she knew she was married to you and you knew the Prime Minister and what have you. And Jake Berry, another mutual friend, he got it in the neck because his wife was absolutely the preeminently brilliant appointment to run the private sector in finding a vaccine. I mean, surely Boris saw both of those things coming.
Well, bear in mind that there's a huge difference, and then there should always be a huge difference. And putting aside the case of my wife, yes or no, there's a huge difference between connection and corruption. Just because somebody knows somebody doesn't mean to say that you can never talk to them again if there's anything to do with government. Otherwise, most of the country couldn't talk to ministers, and the entire system would scream to a halt. The point is whether or not there's a conflict of interest, whether or not there's a problem which is then created. And one of the things which I think we just need to be really clear about is to say, look, the difficulty here is that you have MPs voting their own cases. You have MPs are basically sitting in judgment over each other. That's silly. You don't get that in any other walk of life. If anybody else does something wrong, I used to be a businessman before I got into politics. Any other company, for example, or a profession, and if you do something wrong, there'll be an internal disciplinary process. If you don't like that conclusion, you can probably take it to an employment tribunal, but you don't then get to take it back to your colleagues and ask them to vote on whether or not you should be sacked. That's clearly silly, and that's what happens in politics. How can that be right?
So, indeed, I agree with that 100%. So does Alastair Graham, more to the point. And he said that on the panel looking into these matters, there are lay members, and that's jolly good, but they don't have a vote. They should have a vote, and the chair should always be one of those lay members. And Martin Bell said all cases ultimately should be voted for on the floor of the House, not by some committee or number 10. Do you tick both of those boxes?
Not quite, although I'm sort of headed in the same direction. I think that the issue is that you've got to have an independent panel. Yes, absolutely. We can argue about whether it's a lay person or an MP who chairs it or not. I actually happen to think that Chris Bryant, who's an MP, who is the current chair, does a pretty good job. So you might want to change that, maybe. But the crucial thing is, firstly, that an MP who disagrees with that verdict needs to have somewhere to appeal it. There needs to be an independent appeal with no MPs on it at all, who can go back through and say, is this right? Has the right number of, have all the witnesses been called? Has justice been done properly? And then when you've got that appeal decision, the equivalent of the employment tribunal in any other walk of life, which doesn't exist at the moment, not for MPs, that we're one of the few groups that can't take something to an appeal to an employment tribunal. But when you've got that particular verdict in, it shouldn't come back to Parliament to vote on at all. Nobody else gets to vote on an appeal court decision. Why on earth should we? And so it's a question of giving us the same rights as everybody else, but not giving us more rights than everybody else.
Great to see you, and thank you very much indeed for joining us and for those very thoughtful observations. And there is a pattern emerging here that there are good uns there and there are bad uns there, but actually putting it right is not beyond the imagination of folk, and you're one of them with a good imagination, but also you have the ear of the Prime Minister. So good hunting, John Penrose, and best to everyone at home. Thank you very much indeed. John Penrose there, the Prime Minister's anti-corruption champion, Conservative Member of Parliament for Weston-super-Mare. Plenty more to come this afternoon on Alastair Stewart and Friends, including the very latest from the COP26 summit in Glasgow. So see you in just a couple of minutes.
Looking ahead to this afternoon, and the UK is looking windy, especially in the northwest, with a band of rain spreading southeastwards. A mostly dry but cloudy afternoon for the southwest, with a strong wind developing as rain approaches from the northwest. Feeling mild despite the wind, with highs of 13 degrees. For London and the southeast, a few showers, but also some bright or sunny spells in the mix. Breezy with temperatures peaking at 13 degrees. Wet and windy for Wales, rain becoming widespread by the end of the afternoon and accompanied by a strong southwesterly wind and mild temperatures. A similar story for northwest England, where rain and strong winds will set in for the afternoon. A risk of gales along exposed coasts and over the moors and Pennines. For northeast England, a cloudy and windy afternoon is on the cards, although not as wet for those in the northwest. On the mild side again, thanks to the southwest winds. Now a windy afternoon for southern Scotland, with scattered showers blowing in from the west and northwest. A risk of coastal gales at times, especially in and around any showers. For Northern Ireland, it'll also be a windy day with a mixture of sunny spells and scattered showers. Showers will mainly affect northern and western parts, highs of 12 degrees. Staying windy this evening, with rain or showers and some severe gales developing across parts of northern Scotland. And that is how the weather is shaping up for the rest of the day.
You're watching GB News live across the UK and the world on our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We are here for you. Don't forget to join our YouTube community by clicking on that subscribe button.
And if you want the GB News app, you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you, so email us.
gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else. I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
You're watching Alastair Stewart and Friends here on GB News, and thank you very much indeed for so doing. It is Global Day of Action for Climate Justice today, and protests are taking place across the world, including in Glasgow, of course, where COP26 is being held. Well, our political correspondent, Tom Harwood, has been there from the very start and has seen week one equally from start to finish, and he is there for us now. Give us your overall take, Tom, first of all, on how it's going, because Greta's saying nothing, it's all a waste of time, whereas I've just had Stanley Johnson on the programme saying, actually, do you know, on coal, on methane, on trees, a lot of progress has been made.
Yes, it sounds pretty extraordinary to hear many people, not only Greta Thunberg, but most people standing behind me at this protest today in George Square in Glasgow, saying that COP26 is irrelevant, doesn't mean anything, isn't doing anything. Well, it is peculiar to see environmental activists opposing the kind of conference that is doing many of the things that they've been asking politicians to do for years. It's hard to sort of sit and say that nothing has happened when there's been literally trillions of dollars worth of investment pledged at this conference, when various schemes to tax and to ban and to move on many different issues have been agreed by literally hundreds of countries. For many people, COP26 has gone a bit too far. We're talking about fines for businesses in this country that don't submit to a net zero plan, that don't present that to the government. We're talking about banning gas boilers, banning cars that aren't electric or that have the internal combustion engine. I mean, there has been a huge amount that has been discussed, and many countries, even the Chinas and the Brazils of this world, signing up to ending deforestation within the next 9 years. There have been some pretty seismic things that have been discussed, so I think it's right to raise an eyebrow or two when there are protesters who say that there's been nothing of merit discussed or achieved. It makes you wonder, will anything ever be enough for the people behind me today?
I don't dispute that, and I think we exchanged tweets on it last night, sharing our mutual agreement. I mean, they have their right to make their point, but they need to be interrogated as well, rather than just reported. Now, the other thing that you pointed out yesterday was that the, as it were, the jamboree of leaders is paused for now. They'll come back if there's something to celebrate at the end of it. But we now move into experts, Sherpas, the fixers in the background. What's coming up in the next few days that we need to watch out for, Tom?
Well, there's sort of two halves to COP within this blue zone, the UN controlled area, the non-public area where there are the exhibits, but also the policy makers, the lobbyists, the journalists even. There's going to be a series of programmes and focused days. So we know that on Monday there'll be lots of talk about decarbonising transport. We know various other days will be focused on various other things, but that's the public-facing side of COP. And really, those are things that have been announced or agreed in the weeks leading up to this. That's not anything new. These are just announcements, probably pre-packaged announcements that we can expect over the next week. What is really going on in the sort of other half of this UN zone of COP is those negotiations, are the teams of negotiators for various countries. I've done a video for GBNews where we've walked through these sort of this sea of white boxes. Each country has their own little porter cabin where their negotiators sort of hold down and present what they think their countries can accept, and then they go into the bigger negotiating rooms and they all talk to each other. And the idea is that hopefully by the end of this coming week there'll be some grand agreement amongst the 196 parties to this conference. That's what COP stands for, Conference of the Parties. There are 196 of them that have signed up to various successive UN agreements on climate change, and the task of this one, in the eyes of its hosts, the UK, and to a lesser extent Italy, is to put meat on the bones of that Paris Agreement. Everyone's agreed that carbon emissions have to be reduced. They haven't yet agreed how they will do that to a substantial degree. That's what the next week is all about.
Well, I'm delighted that you are there because you always have your eye on the main story and your ear to the ground. So keep in touch, Tom, and look forward to talking to you again very, very soon. That's Tom Harwood, GB News' political correspondent at COP26 in Glasgow. You're watching Alastair Stewart and Friends. We've plenty more still to come this afternoon, including a GB News exclusive, a report on the child exploitation scandal in Rotherham. But first, let's bring you right up to date with all of your news headlines. Here is Amelia.
I'm Amelia Harper. Here are the latest headlines. Thousands of people are gathering in Glasgow ahead of a march calling for more action on climate change. 50,000 people are expected to march through the city again this afternoon, where the UN COP26 climate summit is taking place. Demonstrations are also happening in Newcastle, Cardiff, Manchester and London. Now, there are some flashing images in this next story. At least 8 people have died in a crowd surge at a festival in Houston, Texas. Several others were also injured at Astroworld Festival on Friday evening, while rapper Travis Scott was performing on the stage. 17 people were taken to hospital, including 11 who were in cardiac arrest. At least 92 people have been killed after an oil tanker exploded near Sierra Leone's capital. It happened when large crowds gathered to collect fuel leaking from a road traffic accident in Freetown. A giant fireball could be seen burning in the night sky. President Julius Maada Bio, who is in Scotland attending COP26, called it a horrendous loss of life. Meanwhile, a knife attack on a high-speed train in Germany has severely injured 3 people. The train was travelling between Regensburg and Nuremberg when the attack happened at around 9 a.m. local time. A 27-year-old man of Syrian nationality has been arrested, but there's no information yet about possible motives. A second unnamed player of Asian heritage has come forward alleging racial abuse at Yorkshire County Cricket Club. It comes amid criticism of the club's response to racism experienced by Azim Rafiq. Yesterday, Yorkshire chairman Roger Hutton was one of several board members to resign. A woman has been arrested after a paddleboarding incident on a river in Wales in which 4 people died. It follows the death of the 4th person who'd been in hospital after the incident. The suspect was arrested on suspicion of gross negligence manslaughter. They have since been released under investigation. And people will be able to book their COVID-19 booster jabs 5 months after their second dose from Monday. Currently, boosters can only be booked after 6, but that booking system is changing next week to speed up their rollout ahead of winter. People will still only be able to receive the vaccine 6 months after their second dose. You're right up to date. I'll have more on today's main news stories at the top of the hour.
You're watching GB News live across the UK and the world on our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We are here for you. Don't forget to join our YouTube community by clicking on that subscribe button.
And if you want the GB News app, you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you, so email us.
gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilized conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else. I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
Welcome back. You're watching Alastair Stewart and friends here on GB News. Now, GB News can reveal 1,665 children may have been at risk of being sexually exploited in Rotherham since 2017. The number comes from Rotherham Council's risk assessment forms, with the data obtained under the Freedom of Information Act by us. It comes after a report this week from opposition Conservatives on Rotherham Council claimed that there were, and I quote, multiple examples of active grooming and CSE in the town, although this was disputed by the council and indeed by South Yorkshire Police. Step back. The 2014 J report found that 1,500 girls were abused in Rotherham between 1997 and 2013. Well, our Yorkshire and Humber reporter Kevin Larkin is behind this breakthrough for GB News, and there he is live in Rotherham for us now with more on his exclusive report. What's the reaction been to what you've already put out there, Kevin?
Well, Alastair, this comes in a week when, as you say, opposition Conservatives said there were multiple examples of active grooming and CSE in Rotherham. And I asked the Conservative opposition leader, Emily Barley, if she is concerned that child sexual exploitation is on the rise here in Rotherham.
It seems to be becoming a more visible problem that people are more aware of. So I suppose that does indicate that it's a growing problem. But it's really difficult to tell because no one's really got a grip of this. I don't believe that enough is being done. So it's very difficult to tell sort of whether it's growing, where it is, and all of that kind of thing. No one seems to know or even really want to talk about it.
Well, that Conservative report has been disputed by South Yorkshire Police and Crime Commissioner Dr Alan Billings, who told GB News this week that there are 34 active cases of CSE in Rotherham and that 29 suspects have been arrested, Alastair.
I mean, this is an extraordinary story because it's one of those that across the piece people are saying, nobody's reporting on it, it's all far, far too sensitive. But at the heart of it all are young folk. That's what matters more than anything else. So what's being done to try and prevent children in the future coming to harm in Rotherham?
Absolutely, Alastair. So Rotherham Council have told us they work with Barnardos in every school here in Rotherham to raise awareness of grooming. South Yorkshire Police have told us they have dedicated CSE teams and they provide training as well to spot the signs of CSE, and they train hotel receptionists, taxi drivers and takeaway staff as well.
And interestingly, it's the scale that also has really deeply upset people. An individual case of abuse is heartbreaking, but at this scale, it's soul-destroying. And yet, there is some confusion around the numbers Rotherham Council has been providing when it comes to child sexual exploitation. What can you tell us about that confusion?
Well, yes, so this began last year when a CSE survivor of abuse here in Rotherham, Elizabeth, asked Rotherham Council leader Chris Reid for the numbers of cases here in Rotherham, and she was told that there were 636 cases of child sexual exploitation in Rotherham between 2014 and November 2020. Now, we used exactly the same definition, word for word, in her letter to ask Rotherham Council for the data too, but when we got our response, we got much higher numbers. And Elizabeth told us she's concerned that two sets of data seem to have been provided in answer to the same question. Do you think this could just be an innocent mistake, just an admin error or something like that?
For the council to give out numbers like that, then surely it can't be a mistake. Either the mistake's being given to me or it's being given to you, but I think the public and victims and their families and survivors and anybody who's affected by this needs to know the truth and what they're actually doing.
Well, Rotherham Council have since clarified that the figures Elizabeth was given show that 636 children had been supported by their staff between 2014 and November 2020, while the figures we were given were the number of risk assessments which were completed. Now, we don't know why they sent two completely different sets of data in answer to the same question. We have asked Rotherham Council that, and we're trying to get an answer from them on that. But of course, Alastair, as you say, the scale is fairly shocking, that 1,665 children here in Rotherham may have been at risk of being sexually exploited since 2017.
Extraordinary. I mean, that was then, and to a degree now. The other crucial question, of course, is about the future. What have the authorities said to you about the key issue of grooming in Rotherham?
Well, South Yorkshire Police told us this week that CSE remains a problem in Rotherham, as it does right across the country, in their words, and that they are working tirelessly to bring people to justice and prevent harm in the first place. I also spoke to South Yorkshire's Police and Crime Commissioner, Dr. Alan Billings, and he had this to say.
We'd like to reassure the people of Rotherham that all those who are in a position to know, whether it's the police or the local authority, and more particularly those outside independent bodies like Ofsted, like Her Majesty's inspectors, are convinced that the children of Rotherham are being properly safeguarded, both by the council and by the police.
Rotherham Council, for their part, have said they take all allegations of child abuse very seriously. They also say the independent inspectors Ofsted say children's services here have, in their words, been transformed since 2014. And the council also says that not every allegation will be validated, but they're urging anyone to report any suspicions they may have.
Final, quick personal question to you, because your fingerprints are all over this as a bit of investigative journalism, of which we are profoundly proud, and well done to you. Did it upset you? Did it get you when you were delving into this? Because we've all followed it as journalists, we've all read about it, but you were right in there at the coalface. What impact did that have on you, Kevin?
It's upsetting, Alastair. I mean, when you speak to people like our survivor, Elizabeth, and you hear her story, and you hear the concerns she has, and the efforts of Emily Barley, who I also spoke to, and the concerns there. Of course, these concerns are cross-party in Rotherham. I think everybody here is attempting to get to the bottom of it, but it's just very upsetting. And being from this part of the world as well, I think the biggest thing when you speak to people here in Rotherham, they say, not again. And it's difficult to say how you respond to that emotionally. A lot of people here are just very upset and they want the answers and greater efforts made to tackle this problem in the first place, which of course the authorities here say they are doing as well.
Good work, Kevin. Well done. Thank you very much indeed. And look after yourself. Kevin Larkin there, with a fine piece of journalism, but much, much more important, as he himself said, hopefully contributing to a better future for the young people of Rotherham. You're watching Alastair Stewart and Friends. We have plenty more to come this Saturday afternoon. Mamma mia! ABBA are back, and how, with their first album for 40 years. Voyage was released this week, and now the Swedish supergroup say they might even help the UK at Eurovision. But they won't be singing. More on that intriguing prospect very shortly. See you in a couple of minutes.
Join me, Nana Akua, on Fridays, Saturdays and Sunday afternoons here on GB News. Expect fiery debate and passionate discussion as my panel and I take on some of the top stories hitting the headlines.
You can look up the statistics.
No, you look it up. I hug everyone. We learn from it and try and move on. That's it. Opinion is at the heart of the show. It's a place for open and frank conversation, but without the fear of cancellation. So join me here on GB News on Friday, Saturday and Sunday afternoons between 4 and 6 p.m.
You're watching GB News live across the UK and the world on our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We are here for you. Don't forget to join our YouTube community by clicking on that subscribe button.
And if you want the GB News app, you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you, so email us.
gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else. I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
Welcome back. You're watching Alastair Stewart and Friends on GB News. Last week, we were celebrating Elton John, Duran Duran, and of course, the mighty Rolling Stones, all with chart success. Well, today, it is the turn of ABBA and how. Now, worldwide, they had already sold more than 300 million albums and singles. As Agneta, Annefred, Benny and Bjorn would say, money, money, money. And now they have released their first album for 40 years, Voyage. It had a mixed reaction so far from the critics, but as far as sales are concerned, wow, wow. So, of course, there was only one person we could go to, and that is the friend of the show and UK artist manager Nick Stewart, and a mate of mine, and there he sits. Back with a bang, bigger than even you suggested, perhaps.
Well, we wait to see, Alastair, actually. Ed Sheeran did 184,000 to get to number one this week, which is pretty good across physical, streaming and downloads. The ABBA ship was 100, I believe. So a lot of that would have been physical. Physical market at the moment is giving people in the industry a little bit of worry. It's not as big as they might have hoped with these four huge behemoths. We've had Coldplay, we've had Elton, we've now had Ed Sheeran, and Adele yet to come, which will be the biggest of the lot.
So have the media got a bit carried away with themselves?
No, it's big news. I mean, it really
good.
is. I mean, the return of ABBA is enormous. The point is that it's coincided with the market not proving quite as ebullient as they thought. I mean, I think Adele will do remarkably well, and you may have a modest pound on her being the #1 album at Christmas, Alastair. But the market is weak. Streaming, are ABBA a major streaming band? Well, mainly they've been a physical band all the way through their career. Even after they split up, they were doing a lot of physical. ABBA Gold, the soundtrack to Mamma Mia, you know, their whole brand was maintained in the physical marketplace.
Sure. And also, as it were, multinational, an expression we normally use about big businesses, but I suppose ABBA are a big business in a sense. But I read this morning, #1 in the sales charts in 40 countries around the world.
They were very big in Australia, funnily enough. When Fernando came out in 1976, it was #1 for 14 weeks, which wasn't beaten until Mr. Sheeran came along and did it a couple of years ago. They did songs in Spanish for the Spanish market. No, they were the biggest multinational Swedish brand after Volvo and the furniture people.
Extraordinary fact. The other thing, and I tweeted last night, and I think you commented upon it, that my earliest memory about ABBA was bringing our daughter back from I think it was her 16th birthday, which would have been about 16, 17 years ago. And she was late back to school because playing on her mother's CD player in the car was an ABBA album, because Sally loves them. And in the back row, the kids said, no, go round the block again because we want to hear it as well. This cross-generational appeal of ABBA is big bucks.
They've been extremely clever in keeping their brand alive, and obviously films like Mamma Mia, the musical Mamma Mia, help with that. What you have to realise is that the two guys are unbelievably talented songwriters. You then add to that the quality of the two girls' vocals and the production in Polar Studios. And if you actually break down one or two of their classic songs, and I'm going to leave Dancing Queen out for a moment because Dancing Queen seems to have a sort of wonderful life of its own. But if you take songs like Fernando, Knowing Me, Knowing You, The Day Before You Came, I mean, these are outstanding songs, and it's no surprise to know that, you know, quite a lot of artists through the 80s and 90s covered ABBA songs that you would never have expected to. So, brilliant songwriting. The production, I'm not going to get too technical here, but when compressed for radio, sounds even better than it can do on record. So that's why their records were played all over the world, because they sounded so brilliant on the radio.
This story about Eurovision, I mean, famously, they hit the ground running when they humiliated us and the rest of Europe with Waterloo, which for us was particularly ironic because we whacked the French at Waterloo, of course, as we've often discussed in the past. They will write a song if the UK authorities, I think in this case it's the BBC, choose someone like Dua Lipa, then ABBA will be behind the possibility of a UK success. Is that spin, there it is on the newspapers, or is that a real runner, Nick?
Let's try and pick the bones out of this story. First of all, the Eurovision Song Contest, which I've always loved, I mean, been involved with it since my French teacher at school wrote the British entry in 1960. More of that another time, perhaps. The Eurovision Song Contest is now a political football, and post-Brexit even more so. The actual exercise of putting in the song and performing it and everything else needs 3 minutes for a very catchy tune, a very powerful, immediate visual, and probably a gimmick. Now, I yield to no one in my admiration of Bien and Bjorn as songwriters, or, incidentally, that Dua Lipa wouldn't do an amazing job. But I don't think the United Kingdom are going to win the Eurovision Song Contest anytime soon. And the only person I think that could actually do it for us would be Adele, because she seems to be able to do pretty much anything and is extremely successful at it. So nothing against the two guys, nothing against ABBA, certainly nothing against the wonderfully talented Dua Lipa, but I just don't think it would be the answer. The last time I got involved in the Eurovision Song Contest, I did it with the lovely Bonnie Tyler, who is a real star, really worked her socks off, not that she wore socks often, but she worked so hard on behalf of the contest, and she performed extremely well. She's loved all over Europe, absolutely, and she finished 19th. It was a very dispiriting and rather sobering experience. I look forward to this story picking up, and if that combination happens, I'm perfectly happy to eat a hat, probably made of chocolate, if we end up winning it with Benny, Bjorn and Dua Lipa.
Lovely to hear Bonnie mentioned, one of the great gravelly voices of the balladeer.
Lovely lady, by the way, Alastair, lovely lady. And my goodness me, she did work hard, and I want to make that point because we really thought actually we had a chance. The song was written by that very fine Nashville songwriter Desmond Child, and it sounded pretty good. Your viewers can go on to various download channels and Spotify and all the rest of it, and it's up there, and have a listen to it. It's still there.
Finally, I and my producer are intrigued to know why you said a little earlier on, I'll leave Dancing Queen out of it for a moment, so I'm going to drag you back to it. Why is Dancing Queen a standalone song that the great Nick Stewart wishes to pass judgment upon?
Dancing Queen would probably be in the top 5 greatest pop singles of all time. We can debate what they are. You'll probably go for Jumping Jack Flash. I'll go for MacArthur Park and I Want to Hold Your Hand, or what I'd put a Beatles song. But Dancing Queen, it has a dynamic to it in terms of its sound. It's a dance floor filler. It is a really amazing song, and it is a couple of leagues above anything else that any of them wrote and performed. And I mean, it was their only #1 in America. Everybody loves that song worldwide. It's featured in goodness knows how many films, certainly in Priscilla, Queen of the Desert, and Muriel's Wedding. It has a bit of a life of its own, a bit like American Pie. You know, there are these songs that get deep into the consciousness of people, and you hear Dancing Queen, you know, in a room or whatever, turn that up.
Sure. Absolutely brilliant to talk to you, as always. We're going to talk about supergroups, but we've run out of time. I would merely say Jumping Jack Flash I love, but for reasons that include the Glimmer Twins, my favourite would actually be Waiting for a Friend by the Rolling Stones.
Oh, which is on Tattoo You, reissued this...
Which is coming out as a celebration. Nick, always a pleasure. Thank you so much for your time. The great Nick Stewart there. The time is 5 seconds past 2 o'clock, and you're watching Alastair Stewart and Friends here on GB News. Lots more brilliant conversation and guests still to come. Hello and welcome back if you've been here for a little while, or just hello if you've joined us at the top of the hour. I'm Alastair Stewart, and for the next 1 hour, I'll be keeping you company with the stories that really matter all over the country. And we've plenty more still to come. I'll be sharing your thoughts on our main discussion today. You have been on fire because it is about restoring trust in politics. I'll also offer my take on that question. But first, let's catch up with all of the news. Here is Amelia Harper.
I'm Amelia Harper. This is your news at 2 o'clock. Thousands of people are gathering in Glasgow ahead of a march calling for more action on climate change. Up to 50,000 people are expected to attend the demonstration in the city where the UN Climate Summit is taking place. It's part of the COP26 coalition's Global Day of Action for Climate Justice. Demonstrations are also happening across the UK, including in Newcastle, Cardiff, Belfast, Manchester and London. GB News reporter Alice Porter spoke to a protester earlier today in London.
You do things to stop burning fossil fuels, to stop extracting fossil fuels. and to support the other countries that need the economic support when we move to a new way of life, and we need a just transition for that to work. So there's lots of issues there. There's a lot of things that the government needs to be doing. All the governments around the world, they need to stick to what they agreed to at COP25, and so we're here to keep pressure on them.
People will be able to book their COVID-19 booster jabs 5 months after their second dose from Monday. Currently, boosters can only be booked after 6, but the booking system is changing next week to speed up the rollout of the jabs ahead of winter. People will still only be able to receive the vaccine 6 months after their second dose. Now, there are some flashing images in this next story. Oh, we have had a small technical error, but that is no problem. Let me just scroll down. A knife attack in Germany on a high-speed train has severely injured 3 people. The train was travelling between Regensburg and Nuremberg when the attack happened at around 9 a.m. local time. A 27-year-old man of Syrian nationality has been arrested, but there's no information yet about possible motives. At least 92 people have been killed after an oil tanker exploded near Sierra Leone's capital. It happened when a bus struck an oil tanker in Freetown. A giant fireball could be seen burning in the night sky. President Julius Maada Bio, who is in Scotland attending COP26, called it a horrendous loss of life. Sir John Major has called the government's approach to the row about Owen Paterson shameful. The former Conservative Prime Minister said the government's action was damaging and that sleaze is unacceptable. The Prime Minister was forced to do a U-turn on the planned 30-day suspension of Mr Paterson over a serious breach of lobbying rules. A woman has been arrested after a paddleboarding incident on a river in Wales in which 4 people died. It comes after police confirmed the death of the 4th person, 41-year-old Andrea Powell from Bridgend, who had been in hospital. The suspect from South Wales has been arrested on suspicion of gross negligence manslaughter. They have since been released under investigation. GB News can reveal 1,665 children may have been at risk of being sexually exploited in Rotherham since 2017. According to council risk assessment forms, the number of children at the highest risk increased by over 35% between 2017 and 2020. Elizabeth is a survivor of child sexual exploitation identified in the 2014 J report on grooming in Rotherham.
To be honest, and I don't want to be negative, but we look from the J period and now we look at from 2014 when the J report came out to now, and Rotherham's a death trap. And there's nobody that is safe, as children are not safe. And we don't see anyone wanting to make them safe either.
Rotherham Council says that not every allegation will be validated, and it urges people to report any suspicions to them. Now, the bosses of 5 supermarket chains are promising to halve the environmental impact of a weekly food shop by the end of this decade. Chief executives from Tesco, Sainsbury's, Waitrose, Co-op and M&S say they'll work with the Worldwide Fund for Nature to reduce natural destruction. The supermarkets have promised to submit environmental impact data annually to the Worldwide Fund. 2 hyenas have tested positive for coronavirus in the first cases confirmed among animals worldwide. Samples were taken from Denver Zoo in the United States after several lions and 2 tigers also tested positive for the virus. The zoo says the hyenas have an occasional cough, but they're expected to make a full recovery. I'll bring you the latest headlines in half an hour. Now let's get back to Alastair Stewart and friends.
Thanks, Amelia. I am Alastair Stewart, and for the next hour I'll be keeping you company along with friends and friendly guests. Still to come, in just a moment you'll be hearing my take on our top story today. After a week dominated by accusations of sleaze in Westminster, what can we do to rebuild trust in politics? But before I tell you my thoughts, I'll be sharing back with you what you and some of the other people who are kind enough to be watching this programme think about that matter. Plus, we'll also have the latest from those protests that are underway across the UK as part of the Global Day of Action for Climate Justice. And we'll be shining a spotlight on an individual who's going above and beyond to make the world a better place in our Good Causes segment. And today I'll be joined by a man who's helping those in need with the help of artists such as Stereophonics, Guns N' Roses and Iron Maiden, to name just a few. But as always, GB News is also all about you, our viewers. So any burning questions or stories that we haven't touched and that you think we need to cover, no matter how big or small, we really do want to hear them. Get your voice heard by emailing gbviews@gbnews.uk and put Alastair Stewart in the subject line. Now, before I share your views on the issue, and indeed mine, let's just take a little look back at what some of our guests have had to say about what can be done to rebuild trust in politics. A brilliant lineup and a lot of common threads. You may spot them, I may touch upon them when we come to what I think. We began with Sir Alastair Graham, the former chair of the Committee for Standards in Public Life. I asked him what needs to be done in order to clean this all up, and he told me there need to be stricter regulations around lobbying.
If you're keeping an internal disciplinary system, which is what most MPs will want, then you've got 7 lay members on the Standards Committee. Make sure they have a vote. And also make the chair of that Standards Committee a senior, experienced lay person rather than a member of Parliament. Though I'm not critical of Chris Bryant, I thought he did a brilliant job in the House of Commons explaining why the suspension of Owen Paterson was necessary. That's one thing I would do. The second thing is we do have to try and tighten up the rules as far as lobbying is concerned. Whether it's for MPs, and large numbers of MPs at the moment have got second jobs and receive money for those second jobs, though they are debarred from lobbying on behalf of the people who are paying them. But of course, Owen Paterson was paid and did lobby. So I'd tighten those rules in a very strong way.
Noted. Joe Twyman agreed with me when I put it to him that perhaps democracy is in the dock, as he told me that this is a long-term concern.
That's the real long-term concern with these things, because individual events probably won't have much of a turning point effect. They will be talking points, but not turning points. But the long-term cumulative effect of these, one after another, lets in people who can feed off the dissatisfaction, distrust, and disapproval, and they can be on either side of the spectrum and present not policies of their own, not things to make the country better, but simply the suggestion that they are not the established group, and therefore they should be selected, and that in certain circumstances, as we have seen in other countries, can be a problem. But all I would say is that this is not a new phenomenon. And in 1834, when the Houses of Parliament caught fire, so memorably pictured by the painter Turner, crowds did gather on the other side of the Thames to cheer. So this is something that has been going on for some time and will, I'm sure, continue for some years yet.
Joe Twynham, great pollster, but also a great historian. I also spoke to a hero of mine, which is always a pleasure on this programme, the former BBC journalist and, of course, MP, Sir Martin Bell.
Lessons that should have been learned have not been learned. And this is the first time. I mean, I sat on that committee, the Standards Committee, for 3 years, so I've seen it from the other side. And when I was on it, and after I was on it, when it was a cross-party committee, and of course I was an independent, the judgments on individual MPs and the penalties imposed were always endorsed by the full House on the floor of the House. What was extraordinary last Wednesday is that for the first time the government tried to intervene to protect one of its own. We hadn't seen that before, so if you're asking if things are worse, I think in that respect they are.
Absolutely vital point, and that indeed was at the heart of not whatever Owen did or didn't do, but the response to it. But in your view, and being a highly respected journalist, it helps inform your answer, perhaps. In your view, Martin, is this about bad people or a bad system?
this is not about bad people. I do honestly believe that most members of Parliament are there with the aim of benefiting their constituencies, their country and the world. But there are those whose appetites seem to be insatiable. I'm not among the majority who tends to think that the system's not strict enough. I think on the whole, it has delivered fair judgments over the years. But things have lately got out of hand, and I think this is going to be a wake-up call to everybody. You just had Justin Tomlinson on. I mean, it's not on both sides of the House, because actually the attempted cover-up came from one side of the House. I'm not making part of a political point, because I was not a party political politician. But I think it's a wake-up call to all politicians. And I honestly believe that lobbying has to be. I mean, there's nothing wrong with lobbying, Alastair. I've lobbied on behalf of the salt industry because I had a salt mine in my constituency. What is wrong with lobbying is when money changes hands, and in this case, a lot of money changed hands.
The great Sir Martin Bell, hanging on there to his journalistic integrity, but also sharing with us the remarkable integrity that he brought to the House of Commons. He mentioned there Justin Tomlinson, who indeed I spoke to. And Justin, in my view, and indeed more importantly in the view of his constituents, Justin is one of the good uns. He claimed the number 2 spot in Change.org's Power People Index before the last election. That index ranks MPs on how their constituents rate them on things like responsiveness and openness. And here's what he had to say about how we can all help rebuild trust in our politics.
Well, I think, first of all, as a broad point, a good parliament is a diverse parliament. Different careers, different backgrounds, different ages, different skill sets being brought forward. And I think with each election that goes by, you are seeing a more diverse parliament, and that is a good thing. I also think wherever possible, you should have local residents representing their local communities. I'm very proud to live in North Swindon. After this interview, I'll be off to the football, and people will tell me whether it's been a good or a bad week in Parliament. I have a sneaking feeling I know what they will be saying. But also, you're right to highlight the need to police things. We're no different to any other profession. You have good people, you have people who don't live up to the expectations. You need scrutiny, you need transparency, and the government and Parliament collectively, because this is owned by Parliament, not by government in its own right, has increased both transparency and scrutiny. And that is a good thing, and we continue to review that, and we must do more in that area.
Justin Tomlinson there. So, we took a deep breath and asked you what you thought, so let's hear what some of you had to say about what needs to be done to rebuild confidence in politics. Let's start with Naomi, who tweeted, "MPs need to be paid properly, but no outside jobs, all expenses fully accounted, all funding fully disclosed and accounted for." Spot on. Kenneth also sent a tweet in. Sadly, MPs that care for the role that they have been giving are tarred with the same brush. It's one smear scandal after another. I cannot see it changing any time soon. Celia joined the chat via email as well. If there is any purging needed to restore public trust in politics, it's of the media and opposition whipping up the claims of sleaze, plus blowing issues out of proportion. We need mutual respect. Celia, all I would say is wait to hear what I have to say, and one of those points I do make myself as well, because I don't think you're a million miles away from the truth there. Robert got in touch via Twitter with and his thoughts on what would increase his trust in politicians. I would make previous non-political employment a condition before becoming a member of Parliament. Leslie has been in touch, and that via email. The only way to restore faith in politics is to vote for new politics. Britain is crying out for a new system. It is time for a fresh start. Richard joined the debate via email saying, A starting step in restoring trust in politics would be to have the finances of every single MP and their links to business forensically scrutinised by an independent body. Anyone found to have broken the rules should be forced to resign. And finally, we have Jeannie, who got in touch via email. It's a rotten system currently that allows too much cronyism. Any politician found guilty of crime should be sacked immediately. There's an awful lot more on my feed and on GB News' feed, but that we thought was a balanced selection of the creme de la creme. So now it's time for my take. Now, last night, Robert Colville, the director of the Centre for Policy Studies, editor-in-chief of CAPEX and a columnist for the Sunday Times, suggested that there was a good case for paying MPs more. It would reduce the temptation, he suggested, for some to dip their hands in the murky money pot of lobbying. I know Robert and respect him enormously, and I observed in the context of what he'd said that in the United States, congressional perks and indeed pay are much higher. Pay nearly $200,000 and more than $1 million in staff and office expenses. Despite that, the lobbying and what they call pork barrelling that they get up to make some of our lot really look like rank amateurs at an amateur dramatics night out in the local repertory theatre. London's littered with lobbying companies offering to guide clients through the complexities of Parliament, the intricacies of government, and the MPs ever present to offer a helping hand for a consideration. Many of them have former top civil servants, ex-special advisers and former ministers on their staff. But in the United States, to put it in context, there is the glittering Crystal City across the Potomac River from Washington, D.C., and many of those gleaming tower blocks are occupied by lobbyists. So my plea is, let's keep it in proportion as well. Also, let's not delude ourselves that Owen Paterson, whatever he did or didn't do, was a groundbreaker. For as long as I can remember, MPs and ministers, serving and retired, have been dipping their toes in those murky waters. Also, in recent days, we've been reminded of the expenses scandal, cash for questions, passports for pals and all the rest of it. And what's more, it isn't just the politicians, as I hinted a moment ago. Retired generals and admirals and air marshals find themselves on the boards of big defence contractors shortly after leaving the service of Her Majesty. Senior civil servants are certainly snapped up by companies hoping to do big deals with government. And not a few broadcasters, retired and still working, make a pretty penny from training big business types on how to come across well on television and radio, with a pointer or two, no doubt, on how to skate over those trickier questions. I mention all of those examples because our theme today is how do we restore trust in politics. They all play their part. As I said at the beginning of this programme, I once wanted to be an MP, not to feather my nest or line my pockets, but to change the world and make the UK a better place. In my naivety, perhaps, but I swear, as I look you in the eyes, that that is true. And many of my friends at university, in the National Union of Students, felt the same. And some of them did go on to do exactly that. Charles Clarke, not a word of scandal against him. He got sacked because some immigrants went missing. But he himself, fingers absolutely excluded from any pot. I mean, in that sense, I do think that Robert Colville's point about pay might help, but it isn't the whole answer. It needs to be made crystal clear that MPs are there to help solve their constituents' problems, to make good law and to avoid bad law. If they become a minister, to govern with dignity and integrity. If in opposition, to interrogate the government's performance and its proposals, to test to destruction, if needs be, its policies and its proposals. Oh yes, and to offer a clear alternative, however difficult that sometimes seems to be. To do all of that, in my humble opinion, is not impossible. It does, however, require a certain type of person. Honest. Rich, not necessarily in cash, but in integrity. And independent on vested interests. Some say MPs should earn a bob or two, like Michael Heseltine, before going into Parliament. The rich don't need the lobbyists' lucre, but Parliament needs to represent all of the people. That's what Justin Tomlinson meant when he talked about diversity, not gender, colour, race or what have you, but across the whole class system, if they are to represent all of the people. And for that, it needs a wider demographic than simply wealthy fat cats. Others who don't have money turn to the trade unions or even the co-op. It has its own party for financial support. I'm not at all sure that that is any more watertight a response either. So, there are two key points, in my view, to add to those great figures like Joe Twynham and Justin Tomlinson, the great Martin Bell and Alastair Graham, in the sense of what I think. We should seriously consider the remuneration of MPs, but also the costs of representing us. The political parties need to be much more circumspect in candidate selection. The rules on MPs and ministers' conduct need a root and branch review, independent, in my view, of government and with a good non-parliamentary voice on the jury. That was one of Alastair Graham's specific recommendations. There are non-parliamentary voices on the jury. They don't have a vote, and one of them should be the chair of that committee. I think that's a great idea. The penalties for breaches need strengthening. There are men and women of integrity, of morality, and of honesty, and we need more of them in the House of Commons and indeed in the House of Lords. No one on a day trip to the cash point should be there, and anyone dipping their fingers in the till should be drummed out. If you want to see how far we've come, watch Blackadder's brilliant episode Dish and Dishonesty, featuring the late, great Vincent Hanna, reporting from the seriously dodgy borough of Dunny-on-the-Wold. If you want to see how far we've still got to go, don't just Google Owen Paterson. I suspect history will judge him almost a bit part player in a bigger drama, but he might yet be associated with a turning point in the morality and the probity of our politics. Now there's a nice thought to end on. Lots more still to come this Saturday on Alastair Stewart and Friends. We will be joining our reporter Alice Porter, who is live from the climate protest taking place on her patch here in central London today. So for that, and for her, and for more, see you in a couple of minutes.
Join me, Nana Akua, on Fridays, Saturdays and Sunday afternoons here on GB News. Expect fiery debate and passionate discussion as my panel and I take on some of the top stories hitting the headlines.
You can look up the statistics.
No, you look it up. I hug everyone
We learn from it and try and move on. That's it.
Opinion is at the heart of the show. It's a place for open and frank conversation, but without the fear of cancellation. So join me here on GB News on Friday, Saturday and Sunday afternoons between 4 and 6 p.m.
You're watching GB News live across the UK and the world on our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We are here for you. Don't forget to join our YouTube community by clicking on that subscribe button.
And if you want the GB News app, you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you, so email us.
gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else. I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
Welcome back. You're watching Alastair Stewart and Friends here on GB News, and thank you very much indeed for so doing. Now, all eyes have been on Glasgow this past week with the COP26 conference well underway. But today, the focus has shifted to the protesters who are demonstrating across the UK. So we caught up with our London reporter, Alice, earlier from a climate rally on her patch just outside the Bank of England. But that protest has now moved on to Trafalgar Square. Alice is there for us. There we are, just waiting for the picture to come up. And a very good afternoon to you, Mum. How's it going? What's the latest on it? Quite a big group gathering in Trafalgar Square now, I gather.
Good afternoon, Alastair. Your timing is perfect. The protesters have just arrived in Trafalgar Square in the last couple of minutes. They started off at the Bank of England and then they've been walking through the centre of London over the last couple of hours, and they have literally all just arrived and are all pouring in here now. And this has all been organised by COP26 coalition, and my goodness me, it really has actually been a coalition. I've seen so many different organisations that have come together. There have been charities, there have been some businesses, there's been workers' unions, feminist groups, so many different groups that have kind of come together. And actually, interestingly enough, so many different ages as well. There's been sort of old hippies on the one hand and some like young students, activists who are really keen to have their voices heard today because, of course, understandably, the attention has been up in Glasgow over the last couple of weeks. Not everyone has been able to go up there. So there have been 200 protests taking place across not only the UK but across the world. But of course, it makes sense that the protest has been here in London because, as we've seen with Insulate Britain, of course, if you want to get a message across, it's always good to do it in the capital of England because it gets the message through to policy makers. So it's interesting to see how it started outside the Bank of England there, moved across here, and now we've got thousands and thousands of people who've all come out here to Trafalgar Square. At the moment, things seem very calm and very, very peaceful, but as I say, there are just sort of so many different groups with quite varied messages about what they want to see when it comes to climate change.
Well, that's what I wanted to ask you about when you were mentioning earlier on, and I remember when we joined you the first time, and the woman that you spoke to then. Don't call me cynical, but it is a global day for climate justice, but it is in danger of becoming a bandwagon with anti-capitalism, racism, sexism. Are they in danger of diluting the focus of what they're genuinely trying to achieve, Alice?
I think that would be very fair, and I think that was sort of my sort of take when I was sort of preparing for this protest, and I was looking at through the manifesto of what this sort of the coalition sort of are wanting from today, and there are just so many different themes, whether it comes to sort of women's rights, whether it comes to the economy, and the sheer variety of signs I've seen today. Social workers' union, anti-nuclear bombs. I mean, it is very varied, and speaking to people in the crowd, it's interesting. I think climate protesters, it's become quite a broad church with people, the woman I was speaking to earlier, and she was coming out of it from a point of view of being very against certain companies that weren't seen as green enough, and she sort of had some agreements with Insulate Britain but some disagreements as well. And so I think what we're seeing here is we are talking so much more and more about climate change, but what we're seeing, it's quite a broad church. It's quite a broad church in terms of how people protest. We've seen people causing chaos in some streets and others people who just want to silently have their placard up and walk down the street. So I think it's quite varied, but I think, as you say, does it make it difficult to know what the message is from today? I think it's fair to say that it makes things perhaps slightly less clear, but I'm not sure if everyone here is necessarily wanting to get one message across. I think there is a sense of people coming together as a coalition, trying to raise awareness about different points and trying to raise just general awareness about climate change.
And as you stand there looking at me, well, not looking at me technologically, as it were, but with your back to Whitehall, to your right South Africa House, to your left Canada House, this is genuinely a global initiative. Is that reflected in the protesters, or are people doing their own thing? If I'm a Londoner, I do it in London. If I'm a Glaswegian, I do it there. If I'm from Toronto, I do it there.
I think it is mostly happening in individual towns or cities. The people I've been speaking to here, most of them are from London, which of course is a very multicultural city and has people from all over the world. But the 200 protests that we're seeing today, it's not just in the UK, it is across the world. And I think it's a very coordinated message to show that there is, while the message may be fractured to some degree in terms of, as you say, slightly different courses, I think by creating 200 protests all on the same day across the world, I think it is trying to give a sense of unity, a unified message of what they're trying to get across to the public and to the world, and very much world leaders and people who are attending COP26 in Glasgow at the moment.
All right, Alice, brilliant stuff. Thank you very much indeed. And well done on the walk, striding across London from the Bank of England to Trafalgar Square, onward and upward. Thank you very much indeed. That's the great Alice Porter there, our London correspondent, reporting live for GB News from Trafalgar Square. You indeed are watching Alastair Stewart and Friends here on GB News. Plenty more still to come this afternoon, including we will be catching up with our Yorkshire and Humber reporter, Anna Riley, who has a sweet tale about a critically endangered species. Plus, we'll be catching up with a music industry executive who turned his passion into a sustainable charity in this week's Good Cause. But first, let's bring you up to date with all of the latest news headlines. Here is Amelia.
I'm Amelia Harper. Here are the latest headlines. Thousands of people are marching in Glasgow, calling for more action on climate change. As many as 50,000 are expected to join the demonstration as the UN COP26 climate summit is taking place. Events are also happening in London, Newcastle, Cardiff and Manchester. People will be able to book their COVID-19 booster jabs 5 months after their second dose from Monday. Currently, boosters can only be booked after 6, but that booking system is changing next week to speed up the rollout ahead of winter. People will still only be able to receive the vaccine 6 months after their second dose. A knife attack on a high-speed train in Germany has severely injured 3 people. The train was travelling between Regensburg and Nuremberg when the attack happened at around 9 a.m. local time. A 27-year-old man of Syrian nationality has been arrested, but there's no information yet about possible motives. Elsewhere, at least 92 people have been killed after an oil tanker exploded near Sierra Leone's capital. It happened when large crowds gathered to collect fuel leaking from a road traffic accident in Freetown. A giant fireball could be seen burning in the night sky. President Julius Maada Bio, who's in Scotland attending COP26, called it a horrendous loss of life. A second unnamed player of Asian heritage has come forward alleging racial abuse at Yorkshire County Cricket Club. It comes amid criticism of the club's response to racism experienced by Azim Rafiq. Yesterday, Yorkshire chairman Roger Hutton was one of several board members to resign. A woman has been arrested after a paddleboarding incident on a river in Wales in which 4 people died. It follows the death of the 4th person who had been in hospital after the incident. The suspect was arrested on suspicion of gross negligence manslaughter and has since been released under investigation. And England Rugby will be playing without their captain in the match against Tonga today. He's been ruled out for testing positive for COVID. George Furbank will replace Owen Farrell in the game played at Twickenham this afternoon. I'll be back with a full update at the top of the hour.
You're watching GB News live across the UK and the world on our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We are here for you. Don't forget to join our YouTube community by clicking on that subscribe button.
And if you want the GB News app, you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you, so email us.
gbviews@gbnews.uk. Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else, I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
Hello and welcome back. You're watching Alastair Stewart and Friends on GB News. A soldier who was on patrol in Afghanistan was told that he'd never walk again after being shot in the neck during a sniper attack in 2010. Well, since then, Mark Harding is back on his feet trying to raise money to give veterans vital mental health support. Our North West of England reporter Bradley Harris caught up with the veteran to find out more.
A soldier who was told he would never walk again. Mark Harding is from Wigton in Cumbria and was shot in the neck by a sniper's bullet while on patrol in Afghanistan in 2010. It left him paralysed from the neck down.
Once I came to, checked my legs were still attached, and then that's when I seen Chris had been shot through his thigh. Bill, who was one of my mates, a Fijian guy, said, "Mark, I think you've been shot." And that's when I looked down, and then it was like the whole left-hand side of my body arm, it was just all dark red. And I can remember one voice particularly saying, Mark, where's it hurt? It says, it hurts everywhere, just up the pain. The consultants came in to give the check over and everything, and then their diagnosis was that I'd never walk again, because the round, the 7.62 round, it came from a Dragunov sniper rifle. It had shattered my C5, C6 in my neck and took the majority of my spinal cord. So I was paralysed from the neck down for about 8 months, not being able to move.
Through sheer determination, Mark's recovery has been long, painful and challenging, but he's proved his physicians wrong, going on to complete a series of incredible endurance challenges for charity, including a 97-mile journey in a canoe and scaling one of England's highest mountains. Now, the Lance Corporal is going to be walking 50 miles next month, delivering essential food and other items to local people in Cumbria. The catch? He's going to be pulling it on a pulk, otherwise known as a sledge, normally used on expeditions in Antarctica.
With the challenge that I'm doing next month, it's called Walking Home for Christmas. So we're walking from my house in Wigton, all the way through Wigton, down the back roads to Penrith, and then down the A6, all the way into Carlisle, where we're meeting the Lord Lieutenant of Cumbria, and the High Sheriff, the Mayor, and then the Armed Forces Champion, Alan Forster. What I'm hoping to achieve from Walking Home for Christmas is to raise between 80 grand just through companies putting their names on the pulks, and then if we can raise another 20 grand on top of that, then we've helped so many soldiers that's struggling with mental health problems.
Mark has a big challenge ahead, but he's not going to let his injuries get in the way of him crossing the finish line.
When you receive the news from the doctors, you usually everyone takes doctor's word as gospel, and it's a case of like, but what I always have been is if someone said I can't do something, I would drag myself over hot coals to prove them wrong.
Bradley Harris, GB News.
And if you'd like to help Mark reach his 80,000 fundraising total, you can. Search Walking Home for Christmas online and all of the details are there. He's also looking for people to donate pre-made food hampers. Anything you can give makes a massive difference, and his story is on that website as well. Now, a zoo in Britain has welcomed the birth of a critically endangered eastern black rhino. The as-yet unnamed male calf, who's just over a week old, was born at Flamingo Land in North Yorkshire and is the first to be born in Europe this year. The baby rhino's arrival continues the zoo's conservation work, which has seen 2 rhinos leave the site to be released into the wild in Africa. And that's the bit that really matters. Our Yorkshire and Humber reporter Anna Riley, lucky girl, has the story.
Yorkshire's first critically endangered black rhino has been born here at Flamingo Land, following an eye-watering 16-month pregnancy, and he's adorable. The baby rhino's birth is critical, as eastern black rhinos are listed as critically endangered by the International Union for the Conservation of Nature. He's even the first to be born in Europe this year, and Flamingo Land zookeepers kept a watchful eye on the pregnancy and the birth via a network of cameras.
Said we had the CCTV cameras up, which we've been glued to, and even though we had a rota of who was going to watch what, I think we all watched it constantly anyway, because the thought of missing it was just, it would have been a nightmare. And then when the actual birth happened, we've sort of seen a birthing sack on the cameras, came up, checked, yep, it's a birthing sack, and then we all went. And the actual birth was really, really quick. Black rhinos reproducing can take a while anyway. It's a long pregnancy, and then you've got a long gap in between births, because these little babies, they need to get really, really big before they're ready to move. I mean, they can wean from about a year and a bit, but they tend to hang around with mum for sort of 3, maybe 4 years, depending on the calf and the situation. So that inter-birth gap is quite large anyway. So this birth is just such an amazing thing for the world sort of numbers in rhinos as well as us. We're here for conservation purposes, and the fact that we've got our first foot on the step of the ladder of breeding rhinos. The black rhinos arrived here, Samira arrived here in fact as our first rhino in 2015. With her calf then, which was Almotti. Almotti's now out in Rwanda, which we were lucky enough to go with her and see, and it's absolutely stunning. And when you get that bigger picture of what you can actually achieve by just coming here every day, doing your job, being a zookeeper, that's the enthusiasm, that's the kick for me as to why we do it. And the fact that there's another calf now in that mix makes the gene pool bigger and therefore makes the whole thing worthwhile. That's what we're here to do. So yeah, it's really cool, dead exciting.
Black rhinos first arrived at the zoo 6 years ago, and as well as delighting visitors, their presence at the park is a key part of protecting the species from extinction.
Rhinos are disappearing, so there are 5 remaining species of rhinos, 2 in Africa and 3 in Asia, and they're all threatened. And in fact, black rhinos, which we look after here, like Samira, are critically endangered. And there may be just as few as 3,000 and certainly no more than 5,000 remaining in the wild. So any birth of a black rhino is significant. What makes it even more significant is that this is the only birth this year in Europe. There's a population of less than 100 that are managed in zoos all across Europe, and we're a vital part of that programme. And so our little baby here is really important to the long-term sustainability of that population, which we hope then can supplant and increase that population in the wild. So yeah, our little baby here is really important, not just to us, but to black rhinos worldwide.
For now, the yet unnamed calf is going to remain at Flamingo Land until he grows big and strong, but his future is certainly key in preserving black rhinos for generations.
So we don't know whether the future might be for this little guy to go out to Africa to help the populations there, or whether in the future he might go on to breed either here or in another collection somewhere in Europe. So it's an exciting time for him. So it's really important that we build on this success. This is Samira's second calf, and all being well, probably in about 3 to 4 years' time, when that baby's ready to leave her, she'll be ready to hopefully mix with Magadi, the father, again. Who knows, maybe get pregnant again, and there may be some more babies here, and that would be fantastic.
Owners of the zoo are hoping this birth will be the beginning of a much larger effort to conserve endangered species at home and abroad. Anna Riley in North Yorkshire for GB News.
Love that one. It's absolutely fascinating. I was just thinking, listening to Anna there and her guests and looking at the lovely rhino. When I first was taken to a zoo as a child, it was all cages and tightly enclosed spaces apart from Whipsnade. And then when Sally and I started taking our kids to the zoo, we very often went to Marwell in Hampshire, which, like that zoo, is about breeding and wide open spaces. And now we are actually creating life and being able to restore it to its natural setting. That's real progress in one lifetime. One of the good issues that we like to talk about. And it is time for another. It is our Good Causes segment of the programme, where we shine a spotlight on an individual, or indeed a group of individuals, who've gone above and beyond simply to make the world a better place. And today I'm joined by a man who, through his work in the music industry, created a sustainable, not-for-profit charity to help those in need, with the help of artists such as Stereophonics, oh yes, Guns N' Roses, wow, and even Iron Maiden. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is just a few. Delighted to be joined live in the studio by Ian Rendell, founder of the Guitarist.
Yes.
I said to you when we were sitting here watching the rhino there, I love a good pun. I love a good pun. But you waited, you had this idea back in 2001.
Yes, it was back...
Then it was quite a long time in the fruition, as it were.
Yes, I came up with the idea back in 2001, and then we... other things got in the way, and other projects, etc. And then back in 2016, a friend of mine just said, whatever happened to that idea about recycling? And took out all my old notes, rang a few bands, rang a few guitar string companies, and said, look, this is what I'm trying to do. Yeah. Are you up for it? And a few of them said yes, and so we did a test pilot at a festival called 2000 Trees in 2017. Fans loved it, bands loved it, everyone loved it, charities loved it. And we launched in November in 2017 in a pop-up in Carnaby Street.
Brilliant.
Katie Tunstall opened the shop there, and it's sort of gone from strength to strength.
It's fantastic. It's one step back then, because that's the chronology of it. But the simplicity is extraordinary. Anyone who loves live music, you and I do, and millions of people out there do, you pray that you might get the drumstick that's thrown into the crowd. You pray you might even get Keith Richards' plectrum.
Yes, indeed.
What you never do get is a wire.
Yep.
And where do wires go?
Yep, that's the thing. The original idea was that over 750 tons of guitar strings metal ends up in landfill every year. Bands literally just, once they get rid of the strings, they just put them in the bin because it's too expensive to recycle them. They're made of two metals, so you've got nickel and steel, and it's just too expensive. So bands just throw them away, and they just end up in landfill. So we thought about how could we stop that going on.
Before I come to the jewellery, which I want to quite shamelessly plug because it's such a great idea, given that those are relatively precious metals, there's just too little of it, or it's too finicky to try and do the recycling road?
It's just too finicky, and you have an inner core steel wire, and then the nickel one's wrapped around it very tightly, and it's just too expensive to like unwind them again and then smelt them down, and so people just throw them away. So that's what we wanted to stop.
So you came up with the idea of jewellery made upon it. Now, I'm looking at you, man of a certain age, beard, could be a rugby player, what have you.
Indeed.
Are you also a secret jeweller, or do you have a friend or a partner who's a secret jeweller? How do we get from you knowing the music industry intimately to getting it to be something I might want to buy for one of my kids or my loved one?
I looked at a lot of people when they take the strings off, they wind them up and just throw them in the bin, and that's where we saw, it looked like a bracelet. And so I came up with a few really rough designs. And then I used to manage bands, and one of the bands that I was working with, there was a connection with a jeweller. And so we approached her and said, can you make this look better than what I've done? And so they went off for about 6 months, came back with some designs. And then we've got another chap in Shropshire who does our rings. So we have sterling silver rings with inlaid strings. And so we just built it like that. So they're proper jewellers.
Yeah.
I've just got the industry contacts, and that's how we operate.
So, Annie Lennox, Dave Stewart, Iron Maiden, all in your contacts book because of what you do and did.
Yes,
I can imagine Annie particularly really leaping to it because A, it's a great cause, and B, it's recycling in a way. But any anecdotes to share, or that you're allowed to share about what these great stars said when you hit the phone?
Not really. A lot of the bigger artists, it takes a long time to get them on board because certain artists, if they're associating their name with it, and especially because it's jewellery, then they have to approve certain designs. And with Katie Tunstall, she was great. She came on board, and we pushed through loads of style sheets to her and said we could do this, and she said yes, I'll have that. I'll have that one. Some bands just go, yep, here's our strings. You just do what you want to do with it. And they pick the charity.
Yeah. Oh, do they?
Yes.
Oh, that's
yeah.
And can you, give us some examples of that?
We have Stereophonics choose the Teenage Cancer Trust. Sting is the Sir Graham Wiley Foundation for musical therapy in the Northeast. There's a lot of.
Oh, I've heard him talk about that. Yeah.
So that was a great connection because I'm from the Northeast. Yeah. Sting's from the Northeast. I actually worked for Graham back in Sage, and so there's this big connection and that kind of thing. There's always a story behind what we've got with the strings. Yeah. It's like a lot of people now are getting married with wedding rings with the strings of the concert they got engaged at.
How amazing! I remember Robbie Williams at Nebworth. Do you remember? And he called the couple up and gave her the jacket because she was chilly, and she confirmed that she was getting married. So, keep the jacket then. The pop music, popular music, rock and roll gets a lot of criticism occasionally for what it gets up to, lifestyles and what have you. But in your experience, having worked in that industry all your life, should we give more of them the benefit of the doubt as having their hearts in the right place?
I think so, because it's obviously a tricky area, but we offer artists an easy route into the sustainability, because a lot of people say, oh, they're trying to do stuff, and then they'll get slated by the fans saying, oh, you're in your private jets and all this kind of thing. But a lot of artists are coming to us now saying, oh, we want to be more sustainable and we want to make tours more sustainable, and this is an easy entry for them because they would just be getting rid of these in Dublin.
So when Coldplay go the whole hog and say we'll generate electricity with people bouncing up and down on the spot and the rest of it, in a sense, you and your team at Guitarist saw that coming?
I wouldn't say. I think they.
No, but you know what I mean, philosophically, as it were.
But we would like Coldplay. So Chris Martin, if you're watching,
Chris. Chris, have a word with the Guitarist and Rolling Stones management.
Yes,
there's a lot of wire going down right now in America.
Yeah, indeed. No, I would love the Stones, would love Foo Fighters, but yeah.
He's having a great run at the moment as well.
Oh yeah.
What a lovely guy. We talked about rings. We talked about bangles. They're the kind of blindingly obvious. Have you now set it up and running and walk away back to the main job, or have you got more plans in this area?
Yes, we are expanding into North America. So we've got a jewellery company in North America that we're now going to be doing more stuff in America. And it's just, we're now also helping artists with sustainability issues and festivals, because I work with festivals a lot, and it's that kind of thing of trying to bring awareness, not only because we bring awareness not into sustainability, but to the charities and the causes that they support, etc. And so it's just quite a good feel factor about it.
That's why we call it Good Causes.
Yes, indeed.
It's warmest congratulations to you, the team, the jewellers that you're in partnership around the world, but most importantly, those mighty rock and roll stars who are willing to do it, from Katie to the rest of them.
Thank you.
Real pleasure to meet you.
And you.
Thank you very much indeed. That's Ian Rendell, the founder of The Guitarist and Watch This Space. Now, we've just got a couple of minutes left, and I did say to the boss that I wanted to wrap up the programme with just one or two more of your views. The climate protests taking place across the country really have got you talking. Brenda, nothing about elections, said, I'd be interested to see the streets after these marches, and are they clean and pristine or strewn with rubbish? Surely that could be making matters worse. Terry popped an email in. We shouldn't give these protesters airtime. They're going about all of this the wrong way. I'm not sure that's true. We probed them and asked them questions, unlike some other networks. Emily's been in touch on email to say, whilst I agree that climate change is a problem, protesting isn't helping the cause. That is a common view. Cheryl also added her thoughts. Apart from the protesting, what are these young people going to do with their own lives to help toward climate change and not leave it to their parents? Paul has also been in touch too. Would these young people on those demos give up their mobile phones, their tablets, their laptops, their electronic games? They, of course, all require power. Bob emailed to say, I don't deny global warming could be happening, but I disagree that it is humans causing it. I'm not going to open that can of worms, but I just disagree with you. A nice one to finish upon. Matthew's got in touch about the new baby rhino that we all just enjoyed, literally all of us, Ian as well, because he was in the studio watching it with me. I'm calling shotgun on the name of the new rhino, and I name him Matthew. Interesting. I think Alastair has a certain ring to it, or possibly Ian, or knowing my sons, I suspect Oscar may well win the day. It's just coming up to a couple of minutes to 3, so that's it from me today. It's been a real pleasure these last 3 hours. Thank you for your comments. I've thoroughly enjoyed your company and, most importantly, hearing from you today. I will, of course, be back tomorrow at midday when we'll be covering all the stories that matter to you most. But for now, from me and from all of my guests, I leave you with the weather. A very good afternoon to you. Bye-bye.
You're watching GB News live across the UK and the world on our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We are here for you. Don't forget to join our YouTube community by clicking on that subscribe button.
And if you want the GB News app, you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.